long time. And I'm looking at that and saying, okay, so I think that we're looking at two completely horrible options. On one hand, Russia says, I'm going to fight forever. I have the money to do it, and I'm just going to destroy Ukraine. I'm going to bomb it to smithereens. I'm going to do to Russia, to Ukraine, what I did to Chechnya in 2000.
It's an out of deep state taking on the swamp, because I want to empower not just the politicians, not just the lawmakers, but the people, right? Because CPAC is all about power to the people. So Kash Patel, what can people do to get active in this fight?
Besides buy your book.
Besides watch Plot Against the President.
Other than, yeah.
listen to Pozo and Julie. So
Well
this is an amazing
done.
panel.
Get that out of the way.
And,
buy the books, listen to the podcast.
The deep state is something that, you know, like Jack was saying, not only did we wish we didn't have to do this. I wish we didn't have to address a deep state.
Yeah.
That's something that you're talking about in like tyrannical dictatorships. But in 2023 America, you have a two-tier system of justice that was created by the very people that were supposed to serve you and create an equal tier system of justice. I mean, Julie is the expert on how the January 6th defendants have been mistreated and how their due process rights have been violated. So the way that I think you crack the deep state is personnel. And it's not necessarily a fault of the last Trump administration, because what did they do? They were never in politics. They came in and said, okay, you guys who've been in government 15, 20 years, we're supposed to be able to rely on you for being, whether it's Republican or Democrat, to do the national security mission, to do the America First mission, to put the interests of Americans first. And some of those people, a lot of them, unfortunately, we just got it wrong. So I think the bench, I want to highlight this. The bench exists. The people are there for every agency and department. And I got so motivated behind it that I wrote a book called Government Gangsters, which the deep state is actually trying to prevent the release of that manuscript. But we're going to take them to court. It'll hopefully be out this spring. And you got to educate everyone. I list every single government gangster by agency and department. But the one thing Donald Trump taught me was don't just highlight the problem. What's the solution? How do we fix the FBI, DOJ, and the swamp and every other agency? And it starts with personnel, and it ends with congressional oversight. And hopefully that's something that's ramping up.
And that means getting the right people in office who understand exactly what Kash is talking about. I want to see congressional candidates that have your book with notes and highlights and underlines and dog ears and everything. Some people
Not
think
with
that's...
the RNC we have now.
Oh, well, we'll talk about that. Julie Kelly, though, and by the way, congratulations to Julie Kelly because of your yeoman's work on the Jan 6 issue. Seriously, give it up for her. And I want people to understand that in the dark days, in Jan 7th, Jan 8th, Jan 9th, I'll tell you something. Everybody knows I'm on Twitter constantly. I didn't even tweet those days because I didn't know what was going on. I went 3 days without tweeting.
Now that is a national emergency.
That's a national emergency right there. We didn't know what was happening. The censorship hammer was coming down. People were getting arrested left and right. And there was one person that stood up and said, what's going on is wrong, and that was Julie Kelly. And just this week, Rasmussen just dropped a new poll that said 61%, not of Republicans, but of all voters believe that January 6th was likely provoked and instigated by federal agents. 61%. Julie, how did you do it?
Well, first of all, Jack has been a friend of mine since the very beginning, even before January 6th, and I would not have any sort of platform on Twitter to share my work without you. So I want to thank you so much for your friendship for years. Also, I would not be able to write about January 6th or cover it if it wasn't for following Kash, Devin Nunes, and this small team of courageous warriors who took on not just the swamp in the Democratic Party, but 90% of the Republicans to uncover the biggest scandal in American history, which was Russiagate. And what they tried to do and are still trying, is to destroy them. But because I had a basis of covering that, It helped with my learning curve on what to cover for January 6th. And then, of course, the plot against the president, the documentary that Amanda, if you haven't watched it, please watch it, because, you know, these are the people who saw this first and fought it first. But unfortunately, what started in 2016 with Crossfire Hurricane has only accelerated. And when the DOJ decided and FBI to go after Donald Trump, his closest campaign associates, people like Carter Page, and everyone was like, who cares about Carter Page? Who cares about Paul Manafort? Who cares about Trump or his family? It was literally, then 5 years later, less than 5, that they took that weaponization and they aimed it at half of the country, because no one paid a price. Mm-hmm. No one still has paid a price for Russiagate. And so they took their cues, they've accelerated the national security state, the intelligence apparatus, and more importantly, law enforcement against Americans. We now have nearly 1,000 people who've been charged related to their involvement in January 6th, criminal charges that are mostly low-level misdemeanors that nonetheless have destroyed their lives, ruined their families, bankrupted them, and alienated them from their own communities because they are considered domestic terrorists. That number will double, according to Matthew Graves, the DC U.S. attorney, who is handling all of the prosecutions. They want, now think about this, you're a former prosecutor, they want 2,000 total arrests. Since when do you put a number on an investigation? But they're so flagrant, brazen about it, and the real villains here are the judges on the D.C. District Court. None of this happens without the judicial imprimatur, and we're talking Trump-appointed lawyers, Obama, Clinton, down to Reagan, if you can believe it. They've acted as nothing more than a rubber stamp. This is a huge, massive travesty of justice. It's hard to unwind, but to Jack's point, the poll that came out this week, when you have 61% of Americans who believe that feds were involved, which of course we know that they were, but also 80% of Americans want the January 6th, the secret tapes, the unreleased, unseen videos released to the public. Little victories. We'll take little victories. So thank you all, and thanks, Jack, for the question.
Okay, so Amanda, now we were joking, I think, before we came on the panel today.
Were we?
We were talking. Was it a joke or was it serious? I don't know. We were guessing which one of us would say something that gets this panel canceled first.
And we bet, we have
bet
a
it was
bet.
Definitely Amanda. Yeah. Definitely Amanda.
No doubt.
So
I'm ready.
When it comes to this, so Amanda, you had a tweet recently.
Oh no.
Where you said, if I can, and I'll paraphrase.
I'm playing a character.
That when Donald J. Trump is reelected President of the United States in 2024, right? And that's the old Reagan line about recession, depression, recovery. That the first thing that the personnel should be made to do when they're appointed in the administration is walk into one of these federal bureaucracies and then just fire every single person in the room to their face.
Yes. Like I specifically said,
I have a list, by the way.
It has to be like a gang where you have to prove that you'll do it. So you can't get to choose what agency or what. You just have to walk into a room full of other human beings, all bureaucrats, and deliver them their pink slips, which will be done by Schedule F.
Yes.
Which
is with Schedule F.
I talk about Schedule F all the time. I'm like a total nerd, but it is the one way that our administration finally figured out how to fire entrenched bureaucrats. Because as both of you guys have said, personnel is the problem. That's why we have the corruption at DOJ. That's why we have the corruption in every single agency, down to the FEC, the SEC, everything down to the EPA. I mean, there is no such thing as a non-corrupt agency. I mean, what?
Wait, but Amanda, the EPA,
Energy came out with the reality on COVID. But yeah, so that's the idea. So okay, if there is the next Trump administration, what you have to do when you come in is you fire an entire room full of bureaucrats. And then if you can actually fire enough people that you close a bureau, everyone is awarded with a single tattoo on their face.
Like the guys down in El Salvador.
Yeah,
like MS-13.
And so everyone, when you see somebody coming with like several, you're like, oh my God. Like,
you're going to have to get a whole barrel full of ink when I walk in. Because I'm going to walk in. I'm going to walk in. I'm like, why do we have 16 intel agencies? This one's gone, this one's gone, this one's gone.
No, I mean, it's true. And all I got when I was in State Department for basically ridding us of the duplicative office, bureau that I was put in charge of as the head political, it's gone now. I'm like the only person that was willing to kill my own fiefdom. And for that, I got the threat of being fired every week.
Yes.
And my boss and I would go through the resumes. And I was like, they're going to try and fire me again. But yeah, I mean, we need to change that. Personnel is policy, and we know, I think we all know now, that personnel is the most important thing in an administration, and also a strong Congress. I'm going to get off this hobby horse in a second, but on the administrative state, none of this would be possible if Congress did its job.
Yes.
It's supposed to be the one that writes laws and legislates, but what we have is law by administration. And that's not an accident. The administrative state was built on purpose, which means it can be unbuilt on purpose. That's the thing that I want to tell conservatives, because they frequently act like it's this sort of mysterious growth of DC that just happened over the years.
I've always said that whenever and you guys will appreciate this, Cash, for sure, is that when you're walking around, and if you've ever done any work in the federal government, they have this phrase called the interagency. And whenever someone invokes the interagency, it's like, and I'm Catholic, so it's like invoking the Pope. The interagency, the interagency, yes. The interagency said, the interagency consensus, on Russia, on Ukraine, on China, on the laptop, on Russia, on everything. The interagency, God bless the interagency, order pro nobis.
What is it? But
You never know what it is, but it is the thing that is actually considered in charge.
Junior people. That's the other funny thing is it's never actually like the Secretary of State or like the Secretary of Defense or like anything like that. It's usually just like these minions' careers being thrown into NSC, making these decisions. I mean, Cash would certainly know.
Well, people like Eric Charamella, people like Alexander Vindman, people like Alexander Vindman's brother, who, by the way, excuse me, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, who, by the way, I don't know if you caught Human Events yesterday, we dropped a ton of receipts on Vindman. I got his entire pitch deck where Vindman and his brother have been going to the government of, you guessed it, Ukraine, shaking them down for up to $12 million in defense contracts because he started the war and now he's trying to profit off of the very same war that he started after a perfect phone call.
A perfect phone call.
That's the perfect example of guys, and whistleblowers are something that we need to talk about because there's a difference between fake whistleblowers, Charmella and the Vindmans and everybody else, who stood up a fraudulent impeachment and put this country through 2 episodes of turmoil, which was totally unnecessary, except the deep state wanted it to happen. The administrative state and the heads of these agencies, the Rod Rosensteins, the Bill Barrs, the Chris Wrays, the Haspels, the Espers of the world, wanted this to happen. They wanted this to happen against Donald Trump. And like what always happens is we fight for the truth, it gets put out there, y'all listen, and then they move on to their next false narrative. But right now we have a critical movement in Congress that is another key piece of defeating the administrative state. We have brave whistleblowers from the FBI who are coming out and now showing us how the FBI is targeting based on political orientation and religious faith. 2 things the Attorney General was asked about this past week under oath, and he basically lied when he said we don't do that, yet you have an FBI intelligence report that was rescinded by Chris Wray, the director of the FBI, because they literally took targeting warrant applications against people who went to church. This is the most fundamental violation of free speech. What you all need to do is get out there and help Congress understand the importance of these whistleblowers, and they must be protected. Under the prior administration, even though Charmella and Vindman and company were basically lying the entire time, they still receive whistleblower protection status. You know who got fired? The latest slew of FBI whistleblowers, Kyle Serafin, Steve Friend, and a couple of other folks who just have done amazing work, and we have to stand for it.
One thing, and I know we've talked about this before, but I'd love to see, whatever the organ is, whether it's the ACU or CPAC or RNC, whatever, a whistleblower fund that's actually able to be set up to help these people who come out and from these agencies. And by the way, not just in the agencies, but I'm also talking about the people that come forward to a good friend of mine, Mr. James O'Keefe. Whether you're in pharma or media or the entertainment complex or wherever you are, we need to set up a fund for patriot whistleblowers so that they can be taken care of. Because look, and I say this as a prior intelligence officer myself, who was part of the swamp, right? That when you're in there, you see this stuff going on. When Benghazi was going on, I remember, I said, this guy is lying. This president is just going on TV lying. We could see the videos. We could see everything. This is a terrorist attack, obviously. And he just went up and lied because there was an election in 6 weeks. Well, but when you start thinking about it, is, well, what about my family? What about the fact that I've got 5 years in, I've got 7 years in, I'm working towards my pension, I'm working towards this, and all that money really plays a role. And so these brave, courageous people that are coming forward realize that they're throwing that all away. They're throwing away their name, they're throwing away their reputation, they're throwing away not only their money, but their promise of future stability, economic stability for their families and for their kids. That's scary.
Potential prosecution.
And not even opening themselves up to all that.
Because they, as we've seen with this DOJ, they will make up a charge.
They'll general
they will weaponize a statute like obstruction, obstruction of an official proceeding, which was a post-Enron felony that dealt with tampering with evidence that this DOJ has bastardized and now used to criminalize political dissent, which sounds okay, except it's a 20-year felony, and this DOJ has charged more than 300 January 6 defendants with this to leverage either plea deals or throw them in prison for years if they take a plea. Or so, I mean, they can make up any law, any charge, and I'm sure this is what the whistleblowers are afraid of, justifiably so.
Anybody should be. I mean, we can see what they're doing. They're dusting off the old playbook that they started in the 90s when they were doing things like Waco, Ruby Ridge, et cetera, when they decided to make Americans the terrorists. Like, I said this like the day before January 6th. I can't believe it. I was on some podcast. Actually, I was on, with Josh LaCash. And I said, like, the only thing about me and my friends hollering so hard about, like, get out of Afghanistan, like, no more pointless wars, like, blah, 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 is I was like, what are they going to do with all that money, power, and Raytheon influence? And I'm like, oh, gosh, they're going to turn it inwards, aren't they?
And this is exactly what happened.
And that's what they're going to do. And they're going to keep making this domestic terrorist idea of anyone who owns a gun, of any ex-soldier, of a veteran, or of anybody who's ever sought medical treatment for the horrible things that we've put these people through in foreign lands, all of this stuff, everyone is going to be considered a potential, if you go to a political rally, you're going to be considered an American potential domestic terrorist. And we are absolutely all at risk of that. I mean, it's insane. The
other thing that, so I wish that, like when you have your phone and when the new operating system comes out, you just kind of wake up and there's a new, your phone, oh, we updated your operating system, it just comes out. I wish that I could take the conservative movement sometimes and just push a new operating system out. Because this, and I say that with love, And I've been coming to CPACs since Andrew Breitbart was on this stage, okay? Right? I remember him at the Omni Showroom with the tri-corner hat and the bullhorn screaming at Antifa, and I was standing up there, and I was just, one of the little hobbits back then. And it's this mindset, and Andrew had this, where you have to go on offense. You have to actually confront these people. You have to take the fight to them. And I'm sick of thank you, but I'm sick of the whining and the crybaby act, and oh, they beat us, and oh, the media is lying about Trump, and oh, they're the hypocrisy, the double standard.
Imagine if it happened on the other side.
Imagine if it happened on the other side. We know they're going to do this. We know they're going to act like this. So this week, I made a deep fake of Joe Biden that got a little bit of attention. Newsweek, Snopes, USA Today, they're very, very upset with me because what I did was I kind of dialed the calendar forward about a year, and I had Biden coming up and saying, in order to meet Russia's illegal occupation of Ukraine and China's blockade of Taiwan, I am now instituting the Selective Service Act. Anyone who turns 20 years old as of calendar year 2023, male, female, or other,
yeah,
will now be required to register for service with the United States military. And people lost their minds because I said where they're going, and I showed everyone. And so people were saying, well, how, and I had people on the right who said, how could you do that? Why would you make something like this? And they said, and I said, first of all, we're trying to prevent World War III. Okay, we're trying to prevent the military industrial complex and Joe Biden from doing this. But second of all, this is my best response. They said, well, could you imagine if someone did that to Trump? I said, oh, really?
You mean the media
you mean if the media might
Trump?
lie about Donald Trump? Oh, no. Oh, no. But this is what I'm saying is that conservatives have to stop being scared of the Washington Post writing you up, the CNN writing you up, Jake Tapper writing you up, Snopes, Newsweek, Wikipedia, Google. Screw all of them. They're going to do what they're going to do, but they have no power unless you give it to them.
I said
they
that
have
too.
No power.
I had this is the last of me, and then the two people who actually know what they're talking about should jump in. But the one thing I was able to do is there was an opportunity that was for some reason given to me. Somebody irresponsibly handed me access to the incoming freshmen to Congress. And joyously, I told them, the first thing you need to do is look at yourself in the mirror every day and call yourself a Nazi. Because you got to get used to hearing it, because that's what the press is going to say to you. So you better be used to like letting it roll off your back like nothing. Because that's what they're going to do to you. They're going to, whatever fits you. It may not be that. They tend to avoid calling Jews Nazis, so I managed to avoid that.
This is what Breitbart said, though. They're going to call you a Nazi.
They're going to call you
the next Timothy McVeigh.
They're going to call you everything. So get used to it, and then guess what? You're immune to the press. Yeah. Isn't it amazing? They just disappear.
So you're right. Look, the media is, we're up here talking about the deep state, the administrative state. There is no deep state without the fake news mafia.
Yes.
None whatsoever.
Yes. That's right.
Yes.
And that is the reason, in order to defeat one, you have to take on the other, which is what these folks have been talking about so brilliantly. But this one's going to sting. Check it out. Do you know who helped rig the last two presidential election cycles in a congressional election cycle? The deep state with their friends in big tech. Yeah, it does sting. I know a lot of people are on all those platforms. But if you come up to me and ask me what you can do to help defeat the deep state and ensure election integrity, how about we stop giving Zuckerberg our attention and our money? How about we turn off not just the CNNs of the world, but other news organizations who aren't reporting on America First values because they don't believe in Donald J. Trump? This is your mission. The deep state in the media cannot exist if you don't turn them on. And they're right. You guys, everyone on this stage has been called some of the nastiest things on God's green earth.
Mostly by Amanda.
Yeah, mostly by Amanda. When I was running Russiagate, Adam Schiff, after leaked to the media, he called me a genocidal dictator. Literally. Which is hilarious.
Have you
That's because I'm the son of a guy who actually fled a genocidal dictator.
But you're kind.
But at that point, what they were saying is, that's right. And yeah, should it happen in America? No. Is it fun? Of course not. But if we don't band together against the media that is the bigger component of the deep state, it doesn't matter who the next president is and what personnel we put in. So the biggest lesson I can tell you guys is, unless you band together and take on the big techs of the world, who literally rigged the election in favor of Joe Biden with the Hunter Biden laptop, as we all know, that's exhibit number one. If you agree with any of that, then you have to make lifestyle choices for you and your family that advance the narrative that we're talking about up here today.
Amen.
Ready for me to get close to getting us thrown off?
Julie.
And the voting machines.
So not all the solutions come out of Washington. If we wait for that, that's a mistake. In terms of what's happening with the DOJ and FBI related to January 6th or any political protesters, Governors and attorney generals have a role as well. I would point to the lawsuit filed by Eric Schmidt, who's now in the Senate, thank God, the Missouri Attorney General, and Jeff Landry, the Attorney General of Louisiana. They filed a brilliant lawsuit against the administration based on the violation of their constituents' First Amendment rights. And what they revealed really helped bolster the Twitter files, because they forced Elvis Chan, how can I forget that name? Elvis Chan, who is basically a big tech advocate operative in the FBI's San Francisco field office, forced him, deposed him, and what he revealed really confirmed this collusion. Anyway, the lawsuit is genius. Republican governors, especially in states like Florida and Texas, who have the highest number of January 6 defendants, and Republican attorney generals can file similar suits, not just violation of 1A, Fourth Amendment rights, Sixth Amendment rights, Eighth Amendment rights. I mean, it's right there. So they have a role as well. So I would push you to also ask your governors, attorney generals, state legislatures. You have an oath of office. You are not subservient to the federal government. It's inimical to how our whole system is set up. So take your role, defend your constituents, take on the deep state yourself. And I think that that is a role that local, or at least state officials can play as well.
Just to ping off what you said about January 6th and what Cash was saying, when you see somebody in the movement or someone in your personal life, if someone's going in front of a school board and they're getting smeared, if someone is they're going after James O'Keefe now, if they're going after Stephen K. Bannon, they do every other week, Don Jr., whoever it is, go and support them.
Yeah.
Go and say, and that point, that's the time when when you see somebody walking to the fire, always support them. And I will say this, I don't know if she's here today, but something you can do while you're here at CPAC. I happened to run into her yesterday very briefly, and then I lost her, but I think she's walking around still. And Julie, you would know better than me, but Ashley Babbitt's mom is here at CPAC.
She's right there, Jack.
She's here?
She's right there.
And and if you happen to run into her and she's into it, come on. Actually, yeah.
Yeah.
She knows more than any of us
Right.
what you can stand to lose in this.
Right.
Yes.
And if she'll have it, I would say just give her a hug. Just give her a hug. And ask how you can help.
And if I can say really quick, and I talked to Mickey in 2021, when I saw what the media, the reaction by the Democrats to what happened with Ashley, I think that was the first realization of the pure evil that we're up against.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it is contemptible, despicable, but on the flip side, the support that has been offered to Mickey and her family and other people.
The tragedy is, as horrific as that was, it wasn't the only tragedy of that day.
That's right.
Yeah.
The narrative by the media was, we were the insurrectionists because we stood up for due process and our conservative values, when innocent people were actually being killed by law enforcement, by instigators in the undercover agent community and whatnot. And that'll all come out.
Yeah.
But I agree, the best place to leave it for me is there are many ways to help these folks, whistleblowers, these tremendous families. We started a little movement called fightwithcash.com, and we've literally last year gave away $100,000 to active duty service members, whistleblowers, Jan 6 families, and we're going to keep going. I'm not saying you got to go there. I'm just saying if we can do it a little bit at a time. This year we want to give away $1 million. Come check us out. We are looking to help wherever we can, but the whole point is we're doing it together. It's not a one-man show. And that's how we help people like Ashley and her family and you all here today. So these guys are some of the toughest people I have ever seen come out of D.C. So to be on a stage with them is an absolute blessing.
Thanks, Cash. You too.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just think, as I agree 100%, we all need to support the people that get besmirched by the media, need to support the people that have, and especially because, as you will see, there are defamation lawsuits that are about to start dropping, that have started dropping, that Daniel Bostic, who are going to actually be taking these media organizations to task and are going to win because they are being defamed. Yeah. And that's the thing, is do that. Don't just sit there and accept it. Use use the power at your hands, which is the tiny little bit of the legal system we have left, and use it.
We are just about out of time, and I'll end on this note. There's one man who's going to be speaking on this stage tomorrow afternoon who's been defamed, smeared, lied about, attacked, investigated, and prosecuted more than every single one of us combined. Yeah. And I say, if this swamp and this regime hates him that much, it's because he's the only man actually standing up and fighting them.
Woo! And he's going to be our 47th president of the United States.
47.
God bless all of you. God bless America. God bless CPAC. Thank you.
See you guys.
Good morning, everybody. It is great to be with you. My name is Tim Stewart. I'm the president of the U.S. Oil and Gas Association. We represent most of the small and private independent oil and gas producers in the United States, or as I like to say, the people who take all the risk, do all the work, get none of the credit, and take all of the crap. And with that in mind, we're going to have a great panel. It's an honor to be on the stage with these great Americans today to talk about energy dominance and energy security. And with that, I'd like to jump right into it. Is that okay? You bet. We'll start with Congressman Zinke, if that's all right. Congressman, you were, when you were Secretary of the Interior, the term energy dominance became the really sort of the mantra for the department. And I'm curious as to what your thoughts are with regards to what we had at the time, how we got there, and what we're at right now, and what we might lose if we lose that energy dominance.
Well, I'll tell you how the term energy dominance came about. I was in the White House with President Trump, and I said, Mr. President, we're at 8.3 million barrels a day now and declining as a nation. But I bet we can go to 12, and we can beat Russia. I think we can dominate the board. And he looks at it and he goes, energy dominance. And he loves it. So that's how energy dominance. But look, as a nation, you know, when I came in, we were 8.3 million barrels a day and declining. In 2 short years, we were 12.5 million barrels a day and the world's largest energy producer. And it has consequences. First of all, you look at the environment. It is better to produce energy in this country under our regulation than watch it get produced overseas with no regulation. Period. Undisputed. So if you really care about the environment, you want it made in America because we do it cleaner, better, more efficiently, hands down. Secondly, you know, as a SEAL, I spent most of my adult life fighting on foreign shores for someone else's energy. And believe me, I've seen a lot of bad things in my life as a SEAL commander. And I think it's immoral to be able to send our troops overseas to fight for someone else's energy when we have it here, period. And lastly, we talk about manufacturing in America. And this is the irony of the EV world. And I'm sure, and I don't want to speak for Dave, but you know, we're all the above, but we're made in America, but it's got to be affordable, reliable, and abundant. But you look at the EV world, what's happening. Just when we become energy dominant capable in this country, where we don't have to be vulnerable to foreign nations for our energy needs, all of a sudden we're making a transition with the EV without looking at the supply chain. So where is cobalt coming from? Where's lithium coming from? Who owns the manufacturing, the processing, the mining? China. So ironically, you know, some of us in the audience, I see we lived through OPEC in the 70s, right? When we all of a sudden we became vulnerable to foreign entities for our energy. Now we're doing the same thing for EV. So we haven't figured out the supply chain up front where it's being manufactured. And then on the back end is what are we going to do when the battery is through its life cycle? 90%, by the way, of solar cells are being deposited in landfills across this country and not recycled. What are we going to do with the batteries? You know, where are they going to go? Who's liable for it? When you buy a Tesla, do you buy the battery too and the liability, or does someone else have it? And looking at the supply chain and vulnerability, this is why fossil fuels are so important, because we own the supply chain. And if we do it right, America will prosper.
That is a great point. Thank you. Governor, can I turn to you as a public lands state? I think you're 60% owned by the federal government. Is that right? Owned and or controlled.
Unfortunately.
And it's a horrible landlord, I understand. I don't think Americans really appreciate what it's like to have the federal government as your lord and overseer on so much of what you do. Tell us about Idaho. Tell us about your energy capabilities and what is possible if the federal government were to get out of the way.
Well, actually, Congressman Zinke talked about cobalt, and the largest cobalt reserves this country is in Idaho. And we actually have one mine open, and we're trying to do another one, but they're taking baby steps. But, you know, the regulatory hurdles that both of these secretaries were lowering went up disproportionately faster under this new administration. Dave and I were talking backstage. There's so much work that needs to be done from a regulatory state. Idaho's the least regulated state in the nation. My first year, for every new regulation, I got rid of 40, and today we have zero-based regulation. And the reason Idaho's growing so fast is because we've freed those regulatory bonds from the very smallest individual entrepreneur to the largest company to be successful, just the opposite of what the federal government's doing right now. And so, you know, the big acts, Water Act, Clean Air Act, Endangered Species Act, and NEPA, the reform that needs to take place there. And every one of those was passed with good intentions, but different administrations in different Justice Department and different lawsuits have made them where they're totally unworkable. And Dave was doing more to change that around and got interrupted prematurely on a very wise task. So all of us, to make the federal estate work, to make energy independence, to make critical minerals available, need to be focused like a laser on reducing that regulatory friction going forward.
I appreciate that. I don't think the Americans realize that the United States is the world's only energy superpower. We are the top in production for oil, for natural gas, for coal, and nuclear, and we're second in wind and solar. And it would not have happened between the time of 2015, 2016, when our industry started to coordinate with the governors and with the Interior to get to that point. We are an energy superpower, and we are at risk for losing that. But David, give us an idea of what the federal asset is actually like, what the real potential and capability is, and what is at risk if we do this wrong.
Well, I was really lucky to work with Secretary Zinke and President Trump, and what they really did is in the early 2000s, fracking and other technological innovations fueled by entrepreneurship led to a dramatic increase in production of energy on private lands. And in 2016, when the election took place, Secretary Zinke, President Trump, and myself, and many others, took the model and success that had been on private lands and drove it forward on federal lands. And we have a tremendous federal mineral and energy wealth, tremendous. And what you see is within a few years, 2019, 2020, incredible increases. And now we have the fewest acres leased. We have a very small number of permits coming out at a very small time. And they just simply turned the dial. Now, the great thing about that, in my opinion, is that means that we can, with a few important criteria, unleash that energy potential. What it takes is a strong executive who sees the vision of energy dominance. It takes leaders who are willing to charge up the hill to drive change. And what we have to recognize this time around is the bureaucracy thinks that they have completely won with this current administration. They have won. And so the fight going forward in the next administration to drive change will require more aggressive action, more thoughtful action, and stronger spines of steel. And thank you, Secretary Zinke, for showing me that leadership and allowing me to drive that change forward.
So, Dave, that's a great point. I mean, there's a lot of risks for somebody who wants to leave a career to go back to work for the federal government as a political appointee. And you're up against a calcified bureaucracy. What are some of the things, what's the advice? What do you do? How do you make things work?
Well, you know, that's an interesting question, Tim. I've spent a lot of time in bureaucracies. Ask Ryan Zinke. And what I've recently done is laid out what I believe is a roadmap in a book that'll come out in May of how to be an effective political appointee. But here's the real recipe. And as you hear all the speakers this week, so this is something you should think about. It starts with a leader who is willing to lay out a vision, be consistent with that vision. It's incredibly needed for the executive to be consistent in their policy direction and not wither under a little bit of fire. And then they have to put strong people in place, and then those people have to understand the rules, the protocols, and have the willingness to do the work, all buying in to whoever the president's ideology is. The other side is very effective at that, and all of us need to take lessons from that if we want to move a different policy direction forward.
Appreciate that. Governor, can I come back to you on ESG? We were talking about this backstage. One of the absolute biggest risk for our industry is the intentional debanking that is the debanking of the oil and gas industry, the freezing of the liquidity, the seizing up of capital with the intent to make us with the ability not to do our work. And yet the states are starting to push back because they realize that is a financial risk to your pension and your investment fund. Elaborate a little bit on that, will you, from Idaho's perspective?
Well, we put in a provision. I think we were the first state or the second state, and I signed it that our investments, whether they be in our pension fund or our other endowments, that they couldn't use ESG. But I was, in a previous life, I was on a bank board, and I saw the strong word extortion by these groups that give these rankings. And they literally, there's no in between. They say, if you do X and pay me Y, you will get this ranking. And it's nothing but extortion. And I was delighted. We were talking about this week. Vanguard came out and said, no more. We're not doing that anymore. And good for them, because internal rate of return is what matters. You know, it is very hard, you know, if you have a pension fund or an endowment to, particularly with inflation the way it is, to get any kind of a return, a real return. And anything that reduces that return means that your pension funds, your endowments, et cetera, will not meet that bogey long term unless you're freed up to diversify in companies based on their internal rate of return and their profitability. Profit is not a bad word.
Yeah, and I agree. That's what keeps us in business, as the saying goes. So, Congressman, you're back in Congress.
Oh, I'm back.
You're back and we're very happy for that. We're back in a Republican House.
A lot of people are happy, including my wife sometimes.
So it's nice to have the sobering yin to the raging yang, so to speak. It's nice to have a counterbalance. Divided government oftentimes is a good thing. From your perspective as a Republican in the House, what do you see going forward as the opportunity to kind of bring balance back to things, particularly in the energy policy
Well,
area?
where I think we are in our country today, I think the House of Representatives is actually the last line of freedom. We don't have control of the Senate. We don't have control of the administration. So the House is it. So the House, as you know, we went through a Speaker's Week, and the House is a little contentious. But I'm actually an optimist. If we work together in the House as a Republican caucus, we can provide adequate checks and balances. What we're going to face out west, particularly, is waters of the U.S. I know they can't get things through by law, but they're going to try by rule. And there are some awful rules that are coming out. One of them is waters of the U.S. For those that don't follow it, imagine the federal government taking jurisdiction over water that are in all intermittent streams, cow ponds, vernal pools. For Montana, that's about 90%. For Florida, I would say it's probably in the high 90s. But if the federal government can have jurisdiction in your backyard over a water pond, you know we're in trouble. And so what Congress can and should and will do is we'll defund it. We need to, 100%. Remember, Congress, if we stay together, right, we need 218 hard, strong voices. And if we stay together, we can defund the worst of it. Doesn't mean we're going to change law, but what I mean defund, I mean strip the money where they don't have any money to think about it, study it, execute it, enforce it. We're going to put it on the sidelines. And there's other things like that we can, but it only works. And from a military perspective, it's really hard to advance when you have snipers inside the perimeter. So because we are the last line, it's only effective if we work together. And there's going to be, disagreements and agreements, but ultimately we have to agree as a caucus because the consequence of being divided may be the very country. So, I appreciate everyone's support, but I'm actually an optimist because what I saw was winning is muscle memory. And I saw recently Congress has passed some good bills on the House side within our universe, but it's helpful to get to know your colleagues. In the last 4 years, I've never served in the minority in the Montana Senate or elsewhere. It must be awful. Because you watch what happened in the House the last 4 years, no committee meetings. Anything Republican got automatically dismissed. Right, the rule of Nancy Pelosi, thank God it's over, but it was awful, awful hard. So, again, I'm an optimist, but lastly I'll say this. I've been to a lot of battles in my life, and I have. And I can tell you, not every commanding general is George S. Patton, right? Because generals don't win wars. The front line wins wars. Right? That's how America has always won. And the front line is you. So we all got to do our part.
Agreed. Governor, are you an optimist? What's your view on how the states operate?
Yes. We were just talking, Dave and I were talking about what we need to put in the queue for the next administration when we will be successful. We've got to act fast. It is the old classic of turning a battleship. But if you have a plan to turn the battleship before you take over the helm, you're going to be way better off. And that's what we need to do is put in the plan and be ready to take over. The contrast, because I'm in Idaho, I'm next to Oregon, Washington, California. And part of the reason I'm the fastest growing state is I've got all these refugees moving out of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho that are flooding in to Idaho. You don't need to come here. We got plenty. We are the fastest growing state, but the contrast, we Republican governors talk about that all the time. The contrast, particularly if you take Utah, Wyoming, and Montana, and Oregon, Washington, and California, couldn't be greater. More freedom, more liberty, lower taxes, lower rules, lower regulations. Everything that CPAC stands for is omnipresent in those states and absence in those other 3 blue states.
I appreciate that. Thank you. There's a lot to be optimistic about the federal capacity to generate energy, to remain federally dominant. And Dave, you probably understand this better than anybody I've worked with in 30 years in this industry. I know you're an optimist. Give me an understanding of what is still capable, what's out there in terms of oil and gas and renewable and everything else, will you?
Well, the resources we have are extensive, absolutely extensive. And one of the things that we can look at is access to existing areas, enhanced access to existing areas, access to new areas. There's also the beauty of technological innovation that is making the environmental impact less while the extraction of the resource is enhanced. So today we're actually producing more energy with a smaller footprint, and we're doing it better and more environmentally responsibly than anywhere in the world. And that's why I believe that our vision is so radically above the vision that Secretary Zinke just described of, let's go ask other places for our mineral development, our energy potential, lower environmental standards, lower health and safety standards, and not reap the benefits of having that secure supply at home and the economic productivity that comes with it. It doesn't meet any rational test of anyone. And that is why, at the end of the day, it's inevitable. If you insist on it, it is inevitable that we will drive to that energy policy direction. It's absolutely inevitable, and we just need to keep pushing.
Thank you. And it's true, smart money follows. The United States U.S. oil and gas industry is the best in the world. The rest of the world sends its people here to learn how to do what we do. We do it better, cleaner, and smarter than anybody else. And yet, despite this administration's best efforts, we're still around. And frankly, I'm going to be around in 10 years, whether President Biden likes that or not. I'm still going to be doing this. We have just a couple minutes left. Let's just do some final thoughts, if we could, and we'll start with you, Congressman. How's that?
Well, I want to say thanks for everyone showing up, because, again, the front line matters. On energy, we have great potential, but we have to use it. Again, you look at the Biden administration. So where are they getting the crude from? Venezuela. They're begging Iran, Russia, and it's immoral and unconscionable that we can't, use our resources here. And wind, solar, everything has a consequence. If you're wind, you got to accept you're going to chew up probably 750,000 birds or so a year. That's a lot. If you're a solar, minded person, guess what? When you propose these hundreds of square miles of solar fields, that is public land oftentimes that you're not going to recreate on, you're not going to fish on, you're not going to hunt on. It's fouled, single use. And yet people object to a pump jack that's an acre someplace hidden. This is an issue because energy matters. Lastly, you look at our inflation, which is robbing all of us, right? What are the two drivers of inflation? Energy and excessive spending. Energy side, gas should be $2 a gallon, as it was when Dave and I were secretary. It should be $2 a gallon. It matters. We curb the spending, we bring inflation back down, and we'll get this country back. But we're going to need your help, and you're here, which means you care. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. Dave, we'll go to you and then have the governor have the last word. How's that?
So I have my primary thought as we leave here today is one thing we have to recognize is that the bureaucracy that leads so many of these agencies, both at a state level and a federal level, seriously question whether you are capable of making informed decisions. And as a result of that, they think it'd be better for them to choose whether you have an electric or gas stove. They think it would be better for them to choose whether you have a one type of vehicle or another. And we can't let that happen in America. At the end of the day, you, the voter, get to pick the leaders of this country. The leaders of this country need to hold the bureaucracy accountable. And that is the only way we maintain representative government.
Absolutely. Governor, close us out.
Well, if we're worried about our children and our grandchildren, whether it be the debt, whether it be having an ample supply of the energy we need to run this country, whether it's the opportunity for them to have a better job and a better way of life, regulatory friction is the biggest dampener on that taking place. And it's important for us to all aggregate together. And I know there's going to be a little family feud between now and the presidential election, but we absolutely have to get together, because to turn that battleship around, we've got to have enough velocity behind that battleship, behind turning that battleship around when we get there, that we can get it done. And so thank you, everybody, for participating. These two former secretaries made this country the most energy independent country in the world. We need to have them back.
Thank you. Well said, and thank you. It's great to be with you. Thanks for your comments.
Thank you guys very much.
Nice job.
My pants are going to fall down.
I figured out that the media had come after me in a very brutal way when I opened my social media feed one day, and I saw a lot of people making allegations that I had committed crimes that I had not committed or not even been accused of committing. The problem with being defamed like that is that you effectively feel like you have no recourse. And so in a way, I think you feel helpless, but then you also feel very defensive, because you feel the need to sort of explain to everyone that you're associated with that, you know, what was said about you is not only not even a little bit true, it's just completely false. It's a very weird set of emotions, because you feel like you're trying to defend your entire identity when you shouldn't have to. And for anyone, that's a lot to keep in check. Ultimately, the end game for most people is to have their future left in jeopardy, if not destroyed. And when I looked at my future, I understood, like, I'm probably never, without legal intervention, I'm probably never going to go be able to get a job at a major company. I'm probably never going to be able to interact with certain people ever again. From my very first interactions with the attorneys at the Null Law Group, I realized quickly that I didn't need to prove to them in the same way that I had to prove to others that I hadn't done these things, because they were quite used to these type of cases. And because of that, when they looked at my case, I felt that there was a degree of trust that was really just refreshing after trying to explain myself to everyone around me. I would not hesitate to recommend an All Law Group to any friend or family member who went through what I went through. The level of comfort that they could provide after going through something like that is really powerful.
Everyone is talking about Newsmax.
See Newsmax?
Newsmax?
Newsmax is doing a great job.
The new news network that's changing the way Americans get their news.
Live from the White House with the latest. James?
This is real problems, real health concerns.
What would you do about the border knowing that President Biden has veto power?
From fresh voices who viewers trust.
You can't allow agenda-driven reporting to decide what the truth is.
This is when things are going to start really getting interesting.
Newsmax. Real news for real people.
Oil, the most precious natural resource known to man. It is the engine that drives every modern economy and has provided the foundation for innovation worldwide. From powering our cities and fueling our vehicles to the more than 6,000 products created from one barrel. Oil has changed the standard of living for every human being in the modern world. Just like the rising sun in the morning, oil has become a part of our everyday lives. There is not one facet of our lives that is not touched by oil or the products created from it. When you think about it, it's pretty simple. We are all in the oil business, whether we want to be or not. Every one of us pay for it every day. Let me ask you this. If you're going to be in the oil business anyway and pay these prices, doesn't it make sense to try to learn how to make some money while doing it? At Panex, we are producers of American oil. Go to panex.us/learn, where you can begin to build your foundational knowledge about the oil and natural gas industry. A perfect place to start would be a morning without oil. This 5-minute video reveals a world that most of us don't even contemplate as possible, a world without oil in it. From there, you can bolster your oil knowledge by downloading one of our oil and gas primers, Oil and Gas 101 or 102. At Panex, we believe it is imperative to educate yourself on all that oil can do for you. Do yourself a favor and give us that chance. When done, if you decide that you too would like to reap the rewards of oil and gas, great. If not, at least you've bolstered yourself with that information that will last you a lifetime. You owe it to yourself. Go to panex.us/learn and see all that oil can do for you.
For too long, the left have become experts in wielding government to advance their agenda. No longer. We, the people, know what time it is. We, the people, tell the government what to do. In 2025, conservatives will take the helm and we'll be ready on day one because we know it's time to save America. We have 2 years and one chance to get this right. This is Project 2025. Join to serve at project2025.org.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from Georgia, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Well, welcome back to Maryland, CPAC. We are so excited to be here, and this is such an important time for conservatives to come together. And I'll tell you why. The left has told us something that should put fear in the heart of every parent, and not just parents, every single person. They've said they're coming for our children. Now, I don't know about you, but when it comes to kids, I think the Republican Party has a duty. We have a responsibility, and that is to be the party that protects children. Now, whether it's like Zelensky saying he wants our sons and daughters to go die in Ukraine, whether it's the San Francisco Gay Men's Choir literally singing, "We're coming for your children," or it's the new disturbing ideology that tells the most incredible lie that children can actually change their gender before they've even grown up, before they've even finished puberty, before they've developed into an adult, before they're old enough to vote, before they're old enough to graduate from high school, before they're old enough to even get a tattoo, put ink permanently on their skin, before they're old enough to buy nicotine, before they're old enough to buy alcohol, before they even graduate from high school, many of them before they drive a car. Now, when I ran for Congress, I thought I was running for Congress to rein in the out-of-control spending in Washington, to defend our southern border, to fight against the radical left and their ideas of bigger government, more control, to stop funding foreign wars that never do anything for America but send our soldiers back home either in coffins or with PTSD. I thought I was fighting for conservative values, to support businesses and give our kids a future. But on day one, when I was sworn into Congress and we voted on the rules package, and that was last Congress, our speaker was Nancy Pelosi. And to my shock, we had a new rule in our rules package, and that was there was no more gender. You couldn't say family names, mother, father, sister, brother. You couldn't acknowledge he, she, him, her, because gender was no longer in existence. We had a big fight on the Equality Act where I ended up putting a sign outside my office door that said there's only two genders, male and female, trust the science. But who knew this would become an even bigger battle? But then I started to learn about an industry that is turning into a multi-billion-dollar industry, and they have a target, or should I say a victim. You see, their target is not adults that, adults can choose what they want to do. This isn't about adults. We're talking about people under the age of 18. Their target for their multi-billion-dollar industry are children. And everyone knows that when you're growing up, think about it. How many times did you say when you're a kid you wanted to be a fireman or a doctor or a police officer, or you wanted to be something when you're an adult, but when you grew up you became something else? My favorite thing to say that I did become when I was growing up is I wanted to be a mom. And thankfully I am a mom. But the victims of this industry are kids. And these are kids who are confused about who they are. And they're confused about who they are because of what they're seeing on the internet, what they're seeing on social media. And they're also confused, many of them, because these victims of this billion-dollar industry that mutilates the genitals of children, many of these victims have diagnoses of autism, mental illness, they have depression, they have anxiety, they have psychosis. Many of them live in foster care, so they already have lived lives of abuse. And these victims come in thinking they're going to find happiness and they're going to find security in their identity because they think they can change their gender. These boys think they can become girls. These girls think they can become boys. But you want to know what's happening to them? They're given puberty blockers, they're fast-tracked, given puberty blockers that actually chemically castrates them, makes them sterile. They're given testosterone to girls as young as 11, 12, 13 years old, that within 4 to 5 years, some of them are having to have hysterectomies because of the damage it does inside of them. There are teenage girls having their breast cut off. That is a permanent damage to their body. They'll never be able to breastfeed their baby. And there are boys that are having their penises turned inside out. These are kids. So last Congress, I did something radical and extreme, because remember, Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's so extreme. Introduced a bill called the Protect Children's Innocence Act. Protect Children's Innocence Act. And let me tell you my great news this morning, ladies and gentlemen. It couldn't pass last Congress because, like I said, Nancy Pelosi was the Speaker of the House, and she doesn't believe in gender at all. But we have a new Speaker in our Republican majority in the House of Representatives. And I'm going to be introducing my bill, the Protect Children's Innocence Act, that will make it a felony to perform anything to do with gender-affirming care on children. Yes. Right. And obviously, you all agree with me. But it's not just conservative Republicans that agree with this. This isn't a right-wing extremist idea, everyone, that we should protect children from making a horrible mistake, because many of these kids do realize it's a mistake and they hate what they've done to themselves. And then they're left with lifelong disabilities by the people that are making billions of dollars mutilating their genitals. So let's think about it like this. This is actually an idea for all Americans. It's not just a Republican idea, because people like Bill Maher agree with me on this issue, even though he attacks me. There's independents, Democrats, Republicans all over America that agree that we need to let kids be kids. And while I'm still committed to saying no money to Ukraine, and that country needs to find peace, not war, and while I will look at a camera and directly tell Zelensky, you better leave your hands off of our sons and daughters because they're not dying over there. I will also inform the lion that looks to devour, and that lion is looking to devour our children, that our God is bigger. And our God is the God that created us, man and woman. In his image, he created us. And our God is the God that created our children. And because of him, we will get this bill passed, and the Republican Party will be the party that protects children from such an evil that I cannot believe it exists in this time. Thank you so much, everyone. Listen, call to action. Call to action. I'm introducing my bill next week. Call every single member of Congress and tell them to get on the Protect Children's Innocence Act. Thank you so much to Matt Schlapp and CPAC for endorsing my bill. Thank you.
And today I want to share some words of wisdom. The words of wisdom that I have is, make sure that you open your Bible. I've done some few things on this before, but I think it's very imperative right now. The world is in a crisis. Our world, our outside world, and some of us our inside world in our own walls. You know, the foundation of this world is God. The Creator is God. He laid that foundation. When we get away from Him and all that He's given us, the greatest gift being His Son, then we are open to all kinds of bad things. But if you instead open the Bible, then you will find a foundation. And in that foundation, you will find peace, love, joy, things that you haven't had in a long time perhaps, or you only have occasionally. You know what? That can be with you all the time. Sure, I have my moments. I have bad things happen. I mean, sometimes constantly. Sometimes those bad things that are happening to you are because you're being tested. The devil's trying to get your attention. That means that you must be doing something right. So keep doing what's right, but turn to God. Get in your Bible. If you don't have one, or you don't know what I'm talking about, or you would like to know and be able to reach out someplace and find a foundation, please call our offices at proverbsmediagroup.com. You can request a Bible and you'll get it free. We won't charge you for shipping. We won't charge you anything. Give us a call at our offices or reach out to us on the internet and we'll send you a Bible. We want you to know the blessings God has for you today. So have a wonderful day.
Wow. Thank you guys all for coming. This is an honor for me. I am a father. I've got 6 kids. And what strikes me about this opportunity to be here at CPAC talking about this issue of transgenderism is that I'm with 2 girls that have been impacted by this issue from 2 totally different ends of the spectrum, right? We have Chloe Cole, who had gender confusion and had a whole other experience. And then we have Riley Gaines, an amazing athlete, who lost her opportunities. So we're going to talk about all this, and we're going to let their stories be told, because you guys get shut out of the media all the time, right?
Absolutely.
So Chloe, tell the audience just the quick story about how you developed the gender dysphoria and how you were taken advantage of, because this is really important.
Yeah, so I'm somebody who transitioned and detransitioned while I was still a minor. I started experiencing gender dysphoria when I was about 12 years old, and I started socially transitioning first by changing my name, the way I dress, the way I cut my hair, and my mannerisms, and then eventually I got diagnosed with gender dysphoria. And at 13, I was put on puberty blockers and testosterone, and I had a double mastectomy at 15, just after my sophomore year of high school, and I stopped transitioning at 16 years old.
Well, Chloe, I'm wondering, how was this covered by your insurance program, or did they have to pay out of pocket?
Yeah, so I'm from California, and by law, insurance companies are supposed to cover every single step of the transition process, pretty much.
And I'm curious, so they're forced to, by law, cover the transitions, but what about in your case, when you end up figuring out that you didn't need these surgeries and they took advantage? Are they forced to cover the detransition surgeries and treatments?
No, so I've reached out to the team of medical professionals who helped me to transition, and I haven't gotten any help with my detransition. I've pretty much had to figure out how to go through emotions all by myself. There's still a lot of unknowns. I mean, I'm having a lot of complications from the blockers, the cross-sex hormones, and the surgery, and I haven't gotten help with any of those. There's no standards of care for people like me.
That is so evil. The obvious thing is this is so evil. They lock them into this, and then they don't help them get out of it once they realize they're taken advantage of. But being taken advantage of is something that you experience in the NCAA competitions you're in. Can you tell people about the championship and your experience having to swim against a biological male, really?
Absolutely. So I graduated from the University of Kentucky last year, where I was on the swim team. I was able to accomplish some really amazing things in my career that I'm extremely proud of and will forever be proud of. But my senior year last year, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the Leah Thomas story. Leah Thomas is a 6'4", fully intact biological male who swam 3 years on the men's side at University of Pennsylvania before switching to the women's team during his senior year. And so last year, out of nowhere, this person who at the time I had no idea was a biological male began posting the fastest times in the nation across multiple events. It was very bizarre. There was several red flags, one of which this was someone I had never heard of, which is rare in swimming, especially when you're competing at that top tier. And so an article was posted disclosing that Leah Thomas was formerly Will Thomas, and about 3 weeks before our NCAA championships, the NCAA announced that Leah would be competing with us. So that first day of the meet, I got to personally feel the effect that this infringement had on myself and my teammates. We sat on the side of the pool and watched Leah Thomas swim to a national title in the 500 freestyle, beating out 3 Olympians, American record holders, the most impressive female swimmers of all time by body lengths. And I want to add that this was a male swimmer who the year before was ranked, at best, 462nd in the men's division. And so that next day, Leah Thomas and I competed against each other in the 200-yard freestyle, which ultimately ended in a tie, which now, looking back, I realize kind of how God has moved through all of this. But we tied. We went the exact same time down to the 100th of a second. And so upon tying, we go behind the awards podium where the NCAA officials hand you your trophy and you're marched out and you're named an All-American. But we go back there and the official looks at me and Leah. We're about this far apart, and he says, "Great job. you guys tied, Leah gets the trophy. And so I look at him and I say, okay, I understand we tied and I understand there's one trophy, but what's your thought process as to why Leah gets the trophy? And he said, well, for photo purposes, Leah has to have the trophy, so you can pose with this one, but you go home empty-handed, Leah takes the trophy. And so that's truly, of course I knew what was happening was wrong in regards to our unfair, or the disadvantage that we were at, and I knew what was happening in regards to the locker room being forced to undress in front of a fully intact biological male. I knew that was wrong. But when the NCAA reduced everything that I had dedicated my entire life to, I've been swimming since I was 4 years old, everything that I have dedicated my entire life to, I was reduced to a photo op to validate the identity of a male. And that's when I decided to take a public stance and really just standing in the truth.
I am a little bit bewildered, though. I'm confused because I'm told by the transgender activists that this doesn't happen, that we don't do these surgeries to little kids, that we don't have men competing against women. Chloe, what do you have to say to the people that say that this isn't happening?
I mean, we have clearly documented cases of this happening all the time. Like Jazz Jennings, they had a whole show about a kid who underwent sex reassignment surgery at 17 years old and started a medical transition at 8 years old. And I started medically transitioning when I was 13, and I went under the knife when I was only 15.
How much do these procedures cost? Did they give you a bill that showed how much it costs to get the hormone treatments? Or because I know that Lupron's a pretty expensive drug. And by the way, if you didn't know, Lupron is a drug that we've been giving to sex offenders to chemically castrate them for decades.
Right, and then we stopped doing that because it was deemed too cruel for use in sex offenders. So if it's too cruel to use in sex offenders, why are we using it on kids?
Why not use it on children? Great logic. Oh my gosh.
There are a few transgender activists on Twitter that are notorious, and they're freaking out right now, primarily because they're getting their butts kicked, right? You have 19 states that have passed laws to protect women's sports, to keep boys out. Tennessee, Bill Lee, just became the 9th state in the country to ban these surgeries and hormone treatments for minors. And so they're freaking out. And one of the things I saw recently, there are two activists that come to mind, Ari Drennan and another guy named Aaron Reed. They're both transgender, so they're males, but they try and, do women face. They say that you two are committing genocide by opposing their movement. What do you have to say to that, Riley?
It seems as if we've gotten to a point in society where, well, it doesn't seem as if we have gotten to a point in society where we're denying basic truths. Man and woman is the sheer essence of humanity, and these people are trying to blur that line so we can't define what it is to be a woman. We have a sitting Supreme Court justice who refuses to say what a woman is. This is a problem, and this is something that translates far beyond my expertise of sports and far beyond Chloe's expertise. Look at what's happening in prisons. Look at what's happening, of course, within the education system. There's so many realms of life where they're trying to, they're pursuing this aggressive attempt to fully eradicate women as a whole, which is incredibly heartbreaking, especially being 22, sitting back here seeing this. I don't know if I was just naive before or if this is something that has been totally sprung upon us, but it's an attack, and it's an attack on women. It's the women who are at jeopardy here.
Chloe, what do you have to say to these guys?
I mean, they say that that I'm contributing to the trans suicide rate, but I've been speaking out about my experiences for about a year now, and in doing so, my goals are to stop childhood transition and to improve the standard of care for dysphoric patients of all ages. I mean, there's very little evidence to suggest that gender transitions are actually successful, and the standard for a successful transition is, well, the patient didn't commit suicide, which is a really low standard of care.
Well, in all seriousness, there are studies on this, and one of the most troubling things that I've found in these studies is they're not good, but they lose track of the people that they're studying within 5 years. Where did those people go? Did they detransition? There's a real propaganda effort against you guys.
We have no idea. We have no idea how many people detransition, how many of them commit suicide, and for what reasons, because it's all skewed. But there's a study conducted in Europe, done over the course of, I think, 30 years, all on adult patients who did a full transition, like hormones, surgeries, and they were actually about 19 times higher risk of committing suicide.
Riley, Governor Larry Hogan was on the Sunday morning talk shows a few weeks ago, and he lumped these transgender issues, the sports and all that, and he dismissed it as the culture war. And he says that we don't need to protect kids in schools from all this stuff. If he runs for president, he's not going to get in the culture. What do you have to say to these politicians? Because there's a lot of them, and a lot of them are in the Republican Party, the party that should be obviously opposing this. What do you have to say to the politicians that say that this is just a trumped-up culture war and we should be focusing on the fiscal issues and the important issues of the day?
Well, I've been going around to a lot of different states and testifying on behalf of women in sports, or fairness in women's sports legislation, and that is something I'm seeing, is when I go to these states like Kansas or Oklahoma or Colorado, which failed miserably, unfortunately, these Democrats, they say, oh, well, this isn't happening. We have 4 transgender athletes in the state. Why are we worried about this? We have other more pressing issues. First, that is not true. These states that say they have 4 transgender athletes, it is so incredibly underreported. You might have 4 transgender athletes on one softball team. I talked to a person on the plane the other day on my way home from Texas who said her daughter's team had 7 transgenders on her basketball team. 7, and this is in Texas. So it's happening. There's cases of happening all across college that are not reported on because these universities don't want to admit they have men on their women's teams, but they do. It's happening. I had a parent reach out to me. Her daughter's 6-year-old cheerleading team, and it's not a co-ed. It's a women's, or I guess young girls' cheerleading team, had a male flipping up and down the court. It's happening in masters divisions. I talked to a 65-year-old lady golfer who's competing against a man. And so to believe that it's a non-issue is so far from the truth. If nothing else, let's say Leah Thomas didn't solely transition to win, to change in the locker room with women. This opens a door to people who would fully be willing to take advantage of that opportunity. And that's what we're seeing, especially in regards to prisons, where we see these men who are convicted of terrible, awful crimes like rape and kidnapping and just heinous things. They're now identifying as women because it means they can get into women's prisons. It's more lenient. The charges are less. They're seeing this happen. And so just in California a few weeks ago, after seeing this be successful for few, over 200 males applied to be in women's prisons. Like, come on. We're taking advantage of the system that's already failing. And it's, again, only harming women.
Yeah. So, Chloe, there are a lot of parents in the audience, and I'm interested in this question as well, being a father. Where did you first learn about transgenderism or gender dysphoria? Right, because like as a kid growing up, we didn't have this when I was growing up. So I'm just curious, like, how did this enter into your life, this entire concept of transgenderism?
I mean, like, as a kid, I would hear it a few times, like, from the adults speaking about it or from the TV, but I never really thought much about it until I started using social media when I got my first phone at 11. And, I mean, I was pretty vulnerable to this because I had really bad body image issues from a young age. I started puberty at, I think I was like 8 or 9, and the combination of that and having to deal with like the comments people would make about my body, and then going on social media and the internet at a really young age and like seeing all these really idealized images of women's bodies, just it was awful for me. And at roughly the same time that I started using social media, I started seeing a lot of posts that were in like video game communities that were, for some reason, there happened to be a lot of like LGBT identified people around my age on there. And eventually started seeing posts that were specifically about the LGBT, a lot of like information or really propaganda. And just a lot of posts about these people's lives, and I started noticing like a lot of these girls who identified as trans, they were quite like me. I mean, they were very tomboyish from a young age. A lot of them were like on the artistic side, and I felt like I could relate to them in a way, and it really touched me. And I eventually, after being exposed to this stuff for so long and so young, I started to wonder, like, maybe this has something to do with me, you know? Maybe I'm not a girl.
It's so nefarious. You said something just now about the body issues. And the thing that frightens me, so this transgender thing, it's a $2 billion industry right now. There's so much money. And they had a study that came out that said by 2030, they expected to be over $5 billion, just for the surgeries and hormones and all that. And you know where the projected growth is? All from women.
Right. I mean, in the past decade, there's been anywhere from a 2,000 to 4,000% increase in adolescents being referred to gender clinics, and that's mostly girls. I mean, before, it was mostly adult men and prepubescent boys who had gender dysphoria, and most of those boys would grow out of it by adulthood.
We're getting to the end of this segment, so I just want to open it to both of you. We'll start with you, Riley. What are your closing words for America, right? Because this isn't just the conservative movement. This is America that you're talking to. The news is going to cover it. What do you have to say to everyone? What do you want people to take away from this?
My takeaway from what's really happened, I truthfully feel like since COVID, I feel like COVID expedited things. The pendulum has swung so far. I mean, like I said, we're denying basic truths. This is like a George Orwell dystopian novel that we're actually living in. And so my message to Americans, my message to parents, my message to young female athletes, it's so important to use your voice. It's so important to not feel like you just have to cave to the woke fads of today. Because speaking from my experience and talking to these athletes who are terrified into speaking out. I'm talking, we don't have time, obviously, but this is not just a fairness in women's sports issue. This is a freedom of speech issue. These girls have their voices suppressed like no other, but it's crucial we recognize what silence is, because silence is complicity. And when we're complicit, the left in particular is going to keep getting away with these things that the majority of the country is not okay with. So my message to Americans is to use your voice, stand firm in what you believe, and stand firm in the truth.
Chloe, any parting message?
I mean, the reason why we've gotten to this point now is that so many people have dismissed this as just having to do, as just being like a California issue, like such a fringe issue that it's not going to affect me, it's not going to affect me or my kids or my family. But it's that attitude that's allowed this to fester. And it's made its way into schools, into institutions, because of this carelessness. But whether it's 10 kids or 100 kids or 1 million kids being affected by this, one is too many.
Absolutely.
Chloe, Riley, I just want to thank you guys so much for your courage and bravery. Thank you all for coming. Have a great life.
Thank you, guys.
convoluted election proposal ever, ranked choice voting. It's their latest scheme to manipulate elections in favor of elites and against the American people. They say RCV is more democratic, but in reality, it eliminates transparency and accountability in the democratic process. We need to stop ranked choice voting. Join the fight at stoprcv.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from Florida, Congressman Matt Gaetz.
Thank you for that warm reception. If you don't mind me saying so, I think vindication looks pretty good on me. But there is no time to celebrate. I sense a true uneasiness around our country right now. Here at home, we see layoffs by the thousands. We're concerned that the jobs for Americans aren't generating higher wages. More and more companies are suspending their plans for promotions and capital investment and growth. It bears a stark and concerning contrast to the roaring Trump economy, where we made things and produced things and were the envy of the world. And there seems to be no end in sight for the government-induced inflation that the Biden administration would want to visit upon all of us. And when we look to the world, it's not much different. We've got a president who stumbles up and down the stairs of Air Force One as his policies stumble across Europe. I think we had to spend 4 or 5 days asking the Chinese spy balloon what its pronouns were before we were willing to shoot it down. And so, in times of concern, throughout all of human history, people have looked to leaders for inspiration and courage and guidance. And increasingly, when Americans look to Washington, D.C., we see but husks of humans, vessels through which the foreign interests abroad and the special interests here at home operate. And so I am proud to stand before you as the only Republican in the United States Congress who refuses all donations from every lobbyist and political action committee. Their money is no good with me. I work for you and you alone. I am on a mission to change Washington, D.C., because Washington is a deeply corrupt place. You saw the work of that mission during the election of the Speaker earlier this year. And if you believed the mainstream media, we wanted crazy things. We were this wild group of radicals who actually thought we should have a few days to read legislation before we vote on it. We had extreme ideas, like the bills before our consideration should comport to a single subject, so that I wouldn't have to vote on the Farm Bill the same time I'm voting on war powers in Yemen. We thought we really could send a shock through the system with a requirement that the amendments to bills actually be germane to the subject area of the bill. We thought that bureaucrats who had turned against the American people should have their salaries singled out so we could vote against them. Imagine if we could have voted against the salary of Dr. Fauci years ago. What a better place America would have been. And instead of governing by omnibus, where our representatives have to look at some multi-thousand-page piece of legislation that spends $1.7 trillion, where you got to vote for the VA at the same time you're voting for the Department of Education, where you're having to vote for the equipment for our troops the same time you're voting for the woke policies of the Department of Labor. We will never legislate by omnibus again. We will individually consider the budgets of the agencies of our government and give them the thorough review that they deserve. But perhaps the most important concession that we received during that fight was the establishment of a special group of legislators to analyze the weaponization of this government against our people. Seems like every time I turn around, they're engaged in surveillance or list building or monitoring, and I don't care if it takes every second of our time and every ounce of our energy. We either get this government back on our side or we defund and get rid of, abolish the FBI, CDC, ATF, DOJ, every last one of them, if they do not come to heel. And I don't think it's too much to ask. I really don't. And in this effort, I must update you on an important update. We have been taking whistleblower testimony from brave patriots, people who worked at the FBI and saw things like targeting Americans who attended school board meetings, like labeling people domestic extremists because they expressed support for building the wall or the Second Amendment online. We had FBI agents telling us that they were cooking the books, where there would be normally one case that you would open up on domestic extremism. You had the Washington field office putting pressure on agents to open up separate cases on each individual so that there would be the veneer, the illusion, the appearance that all of our fellow Americans, that our neighbors, were somehow extreme in trying to overthrow our government, when in fact that is not the case. And so we took the deposition of a brave patriot named Garrett O'Boyle, who served in the FBI, who shared with us these things. And yesterday, Judiciary Democrats put out a smear piece on him. They took really out of context portions of his testimony, and they tried to discredit what he shared with us as a whistleblower because he's a vaccine skeptic, and because when the FBI left him without pay and without the ability to earn other income, there were people who gave him a few $1,000s so that he was able to buy a winter coat for his children and be able to meet the month's bills. So we have an active case where we're working to corroborate this information, to build the evidence, and Democrats are obstructing the investigation. And so it is no longer time to go back to the old low-energy Paul Ryan, Trey Gowdy days of fake oversight. These are the Jim Jordan, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz days. And if the Democrats are going to obstruct our investigation, then I am calling to remove the Democrats from our investigation. They shouldn't be allowed to sit in the depositions and hear the evidence if they are going to use that to try to get in the way of thorough, rigorous oversight. And I don't believe that means hearings where we yell at people. I think that means a fundamental reshaping of this government, a reshaping of this town. I know every time I give talks like this and meet with our great activists, I always get a question at some point where people say, do you still have hope? Can we even still save this thing, this great experiment? And I know we can. And here's what I would say. Even though at your job it may feel like you're outnumbered, sometimes even in your social groups, it may feel like you can't wave your MAGA flag at full mast. But I saw what a group of parents did in Loudoun County who at first were outnumbered. I saw what pilots did at Southwest Airlines who stood up against the vaccine mandate. I saw what Navy SEALs did who got injunctions so that now we are in a position to, in a Republican House of Representatives, restore every one of our military patriots with their full rank and back pay. And all of you saw what 20 members of the House of Representatives did when we demanded change in a corrupt town. These are different times. They are new times. They call for boldness and patriotism. It is the honor of my life to fight alongside each and every one of you. Go to MattGaetz.com, join my fight, vote for Donald J. Trump in the CPAC straw poll, and let's go get him. Thank you.
Everyone is talking about Newsmax.
See Newsmax? Newsmax? Newsmax is doing a great job.
The new news network that's changing the way Americans get their news.
Live from the White House with the latest. James?
This is real problems, real health concerns.
What would you do about the border knowing that President Biden has veto power?
From fresh voices who viewers trust.
We can't allow agenda-driven reporting to decide what the truth is.
This is when things are going to start really getting interesting.
Newsmax. Real news for real people.
Oil, the most precious natural resource known to man. It is the engine that drives every modern economy and has provided the foundation for innovation worldwide. From powering our cities and fueling our vehicles to the more than 6,000 products created from one barrel. Oil has changed the standard of living for every human being in the modern world. Just like the rising sun in the morning, oil has become a part of our everyday lives. There is not one facet of our lives that is not touched by oil, or the products created from it. When you think about it, it's pretty simple. We are all in the oil business, whether we want to be or not. Every one of us pay for it every day. Let me ask you this. If you're going to be in the oil business anyway and pay these prices, doesn't it make sense to try to learn how to make some money while doing it? At Panex, we are producers of American oil. Go to panex.us/learn, where you can begin to build your foundational knowledge about the oil and natural gas industry. A perfect place to start would be a morning without oil. This 5-minute video reveals a world that most of us don't even contemplate as possible, a world without oil in it. From there, you can bolster your oil knowledge by downloading one of our oil and gas primers, Oil and Gas 101 or 102. At Panex, we believe it is imperative to educate yourself on all that oil can do for you. Do yourself a favor and give us that chance. When done, if you decide that you too would like to reap the rewards of oil and gas, great. If not, at least you've bolstered yourself with that information that will last you a lifetime. You owe it to yourself. Go to panex.us/learn and see all that oil can do for you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the new axis of evil, Soros, Schwab, and Fink. Please welcome Senior Visiting Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Andrew Puzder, Oklahoma Speaker of the House, Charles McCall, and your moderator, host of Spicer & Company, Sean Spicer.
there. Hi. It's great to see you all. It's good to be back in our nation's capital as opposed to out. Nice that COVID is finally over, according to everyone in the government. So here's what I want to start with. There's been this new word or acronym that's kind of come into the lexicon, ESG. I want to know, Andy, I want to start with you. You ran a big company, Carl's, or CKE, which includes Carl's Jr. and several other restaurants. When and why did this come into society?
Well, I would say good news for me, it came in about 2016, 2017 with any kind of force, because that was the year I retired, so I didn't really have to deal with it. But it really came in about then, right around the time of the Paris Climate Accord, where corporations started to get pressure from above, and above would be their shareholders, and in this case, companies like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, which are trillion-dollar private investment firms. They manage monies for pension funds, for state pension funds, private pension funds. They manage 401k plans. And literally BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard combined are the largest shareholder in 80% of the companies in the S&P 500. BlackRock alone would be the largest, first, second, or third largest shareholder in those companies. So they adopted this ESG, environmental, social, and governance policy, where you invest not based on a company's financial performance, but based on how well they are accomplishing these leftist progressive
But just
goals.
to be clear, it came from shareholders, not employees. That's where this largely got driven from?
Yeah, it started with these large investment firms shoving these policies down on the companies in which they invested. And if you're the CEO of a company, you answer to the board, and the board is elected by the shareholders. So they're all very conscious of what these large shareholders will do. This is, they went after Exxon. They actually put 3 environmentalists on the board of Exxon. Within a few months, Exxon had a net zero carbon emissions policy. Now, does anybody out there think that Exxon having a net zero carbon emissions policy is in its financial interest or the interest of its shareholders? You have to be an idiot to think that. Well, this is exactly what the left has been selling, and fairly effectively.
All right, so, Mr. Speaker, you're the longest serving speaker in Oklahoma history, correct?
That's correct.
All right, that's the easy question. From your perspective, when did this come in to sort of the legislative process? About the same time? And was it the leftist legislators reacting the same way, or what drove them to sort of start to incorporate this into the legislative process, even in a state like Oklahoma?
Yeah, we recognized this as an emerging problem last year and started developing legislation to protect our pensions in the state of Oklahoma in terms of the hard-earned money from state employees that has been tucked away for a retirement, and a retirement that they can actually live on. We looked at these ESG funds. They underperform the S&P 500, yet a lot of the pension monies are trying to be seized and directed to these underperforming funds, all based upon an ideology that we want to direct money to entities that support our social political agenda, which is not in the best interest of the beneficiaries of these pensions. And so we've started looking at the state level in terms of what can we do, how can we protect the citizens of our state, and how can we collaborate with other states across the country to put in safeguards to ensure that when it comes to investing the pension funds of the state, that we are seeking the highest return for those beneficiaries.
So let me kind of ask let me twist this the way I ask Andy on this. Do you think it's the legislators driving the train, or is it constituents telling the legislators that they want this done?
Right now, it's the legislature. Right. Legislators that have realized the problem.
And they're responding to the leftist activists.
Correct.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
ESG is just purely political activism, and it undermines the financial returns and the focus of the fiduciary duty that all of our pension administrators have to seek out the highest return for the beneficiaries of the pensions.
So, Andy, I own a handful of stocks, right? And in the mail, I'll get an envelope every once in a while. It tells me that the annual meeting's coming up. In years past, I've just thrown it away. I get it. I'm not going to the annual meeting. I really don't care. I own 5 shares of whatever company, and who cares? Should I check those boxes? Should I look through and see who what's being voted on and who the board of directors are, and maybe vote against some of them? Should I take an interest in that?
Yeah, everybody should take an interest in it. And there are organizations out there that will help direct you to how to vote for particular corporations. Because, you know, you've got really thousands of corporations, and they have, you know, everyone has probably 5 to 10 directors, and there will be shareholder resolutions. And the left is very good at framing shareholder resolutions so they sound like they're doing exactly the opposite of what they're doing. So you really do need guidance, and you need to be able to read these things carefully. But voting how your shares are voted is important. If you have a financial advisor, tell your financial advisor you don't want these investment firms voting your shares. You want to vote your shares, because if you have a mutual fund or a 401k or an index fund investment, like you invested in the S&P or something, these funds like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard are using your money to accomplish leftist political goals that you don't support.
That's right.
Which is the genius of ESG. They use other people's money to accomplish these progressive political and social agenda items. And that's something we can all work with our financial advisors to stop.
So speaking of investment and a lot of money, states invest a lot of money, right? I imagine the state of Oklahoma, your pension fund, et cetera, invests a lot of money. What is the state of Oklahoma doing to ensure that you guys are looking after it so that it's not going to ESG type funds?
We are specifically have crafted legislation that requires and defines what a fiduciary duty is. And we are confining that to the sole fiduciary duty is seeking out the highest return for the pension beneficiaries in the state. You have to take on your pensions in your state. Those can be trillions of dollars that we're talking about. Secondly, you have to take on the contracts and the vendors of the state in ensuring that whoever the state is doing business with, who they elect to do business with, in the executive, that their companies do not subscribe to ESG policies. That's very important in protecting and maximizing outcomes for the state. Thirdly, you have to also empower your executive branch to go after and root out these types of systematic political activism tactics by the left, which could be making sure you empower your attorney generals in your state, the governor of your state, to have full control over the executive branch of government. In the state of Oklahoma, 2 years ago, we passed House Bill 1236. I was happy and excited to champion that. But every member of my Republican caucus, and we do have an 80% supermajority Republican stronghold in the state of Oklahoma. We're proud of that. The same percentage in the Senate. Every statewide elected official in our state is held by a Republican. But we put in a mechanism to exercise our 10th Amendment rights as a state to push back against federal overreach and to authorize our Attorney General to constitutionally fight those things in the court. But we also thought about things into the future. If political power were to change in the state of Oklahoma, God forbid, but if we had an Attorney General that would not seek to push back against federal overreach, that there is a provision in that bill that the legislature could seek through vote of both chambers to go and engage its own attorney to push back on those federal overreach. So I think those are all very much things that the state has to focus on to get ahead of not just ESG, but these other types of overreach and mechanisms to try to grab power and force policy outside of the legislative process. The left is redefining the golden rule in this country. It has now become the man with the gold makes the rules. And Joe Biden wants to use your gold to make and implement his rules and his policy. And that is what we have to push back against at the state level.
So, Andy, the Speaker brings up this fiduciary responsibility, right? This idea that they're supposed to be looking out for your best interest, seeking the highest return. So if you're an average investor, you're sometimes investing in maybe a mutual fund or whatever, what should we know? What should we look out for? And how do we push back?
Well, when I look, there's an organization called Second Vote, where you can check on the political, they rate companies from 1 to 5, conservative to liberal to conservative. And I try and vote for companies that are 3, 4s, and 5s, which is neutral, leans right, and right. Mostly emphasizing companies that are 3s that are politically neutral, because my theory is that companies focused on profits will be more profitable than companies that don't.
Crazy.
It's kind of a crazy idea. But on the state legislative level, it's really wonderful what Oklahoma's doing. There are also Florida, Kentucky, West Virginia, a number of Republican states are passing legislation. There is model fiduciary duty legislation that the Heritage Foundation has out there and that the American Legislative Exchange Council has out there that make it very clear that if you're investing state funds, you're supposed to invest in the interest of the beneficiaries of those funds. And these bills specifically exclude ESG, environmental, social, or governance investing. And the more states pass that, the better off we're going to be.
Amen.
And Oklahoma is a leader in this area, and they should be very proud of what they've done.
I want to switch gears just a little bit with you, Speaker, because in the title of this is Soros. And one of the things that I find fascinating is over the last several cycles, George Soros has created this web where he has gone into state government, and whether it's secretaries of states, local attorneys, and started to help fund the elections of a lot of these organizations, a lot of these individuals. How pervasive is it really at the local and state level?
It's very pervasive, even for a really red state like Oklahoma, where there's really no chance to change the legislative dynamic currently because of such high supermajorities, or in the statewide. But just this past election cycle, we have seen an unprecedented amount of money coming in from the left to try to change those outcomes. And it's not just the election cycle that the leftist groups are trying to change the policy the way they want. In many states, the initiative petition mechanism through the state's constitution is being exploited, and to usher in questions that bypass the legislature's protection. In Oklahoma, once again, we have that supermajority that would stop all bad policy from directly through its legislatures and chambers. These groups are now seeking, with just a few $1 million, they can go out and collect the signatures to get items placed on the ballot before the people, and put a few more $1 million behind messaging that really deceives the people, and which we've seen a few things pass that we did not think could ever pass in our state. So there's a lot of money and a lot of tactics. If it can pass in
Oklahoma within 80%, then it can pass anywhere.
Absolutely. Anything that's run in any state that benefits children and education, that's the message that the far left will try to pass these initiative petition state questions by. And then it's in a very short time, the people of the state realize, wow, we were deceived, and we made a big mistake.
Andy, I want you to put your hat back on as a Fortune 500 CEO for a second. If you were running a big company today, how would the operation of a George Soros influence your decision making today, right? So would the petitions of outside groups, of employees, like what would be influencing your decision making or not?
Well, I probably run my company a little differently than most people do today. I don't think you should be turning over the operations to your employees. They work for you. You don't work for them. Soros figured out that the real action today is at the state level, and that's hard for some people to understand because you always think it's at the federal level. But the current situation where the Republicans have the House, the Democrats have the Senate, you really can't get much done legislatively. I mean, the real things that are getting done legislatively that will have an impact on lives will happen at the state level, and then when Republicans get back in power, they can work their way up to the federal level. And you control a lot. You know, if George Soros had been had thought ahead back in 2000, then I don't know that George Bush would have won the election back in 2000. We might have ended up with a President Al Gore for 4 years or so. So he's not a good person, and we shouldn't say bad things about people, but I can think of a lot of things I'd like to say about him. But he's not a stupid person either, and he's got a lot of money. And what he's done has been very insidious and very effective. Now, if you're running a corporation, you're more concerned about your customers and your shareholders. That's who you really focus on. Well, if you're dealing with employees, you're dealing with these outside forces, you're trying to do whatever you can to make them think you're doing, what they want you to do. But you've really got to be concerned with your board, your shareholders, and your customers. So as customers, everybody in this room can have a tremendous impact, and not just by stopping. In other words, if for example, AT&T drops Newsmax,
they did.
Yeah, right. Don't just cancel DirecTV. Call AT&T and tell them why you're canceling. You've got to get out. You have to make what you're doing known. It isn't just enough to say, I'm going to stop buying this. I'm not going to buy Coke anymore because it's woke. I'm going to buy Diet Dr. Pepper, which is better, by the way. I'm not going to buy Coke. But let Coke know why you're doing this, because that's what will impact their actions.
I want to pick up on that, because I believe in the last 12 months in particular, the right and people in this room in particular who have been super active, we've gotten some wins. We've actually gotten some wins on the board when we've stood up and said no. They can't just roll over us anymore. And I guess the question is, what do you think, Speaker, has changed? Do you think that we're organized better, that there are groups that are, do you think we've just had enough? What is it? But I feel empowered more than ever before.
I think people are just fed up with the current administration in Washington, and they're looking for states to take action. And we are a republic.
Who do you listen to? I mean, I'm always amazed when you talk to a politician. What comes into your phones, your email? What DMs do you get? What do you go? Okay, I've got a problem, or I'm doing well.
It comes. It's for us in the House of Representatives. We listen to the people that elect us in Oklahoma. We carry the priorities to our legislative session. Our legislative session is only 4 months every year. But it's a collaboration between the other conservative states in the union too. My relationship with, let's say, Speaker Cameron Sexton in Tennessee, it's great to be able to pick up the phone, collaborate and exchange. Hey, how is this affecting your state? What are you seeing? And build a coalition to move this type of pieces of legislation through to protect the people of our states. So it's a multi-faceted issue, and we have to be motivated and inspired to really not only just focus on our state to get it right, but to work with these other states to help them. And coming with ESG, we have been working to come up with model legislation. And Andrew, thank you for your input. And Senator Braun was here yesterday. I appreciate his involvement in championing this issue in this bill that we saw go through both the Senate and the House this week in Washington on this Department of Labor rule. We have to fight this at all levels, but in the state of Oklahoma, we have no one to blame but Republicans for not getting things done. So we are highly motivated. Every day we were in session working for the people.
Yeah. Andy, you touched on cancel culture a little. Let me ask you this. From a conservative standpoint, you look at a company like Disney that has gone like woke plus. What is your advice? I mean, you touched on it for a second. Don't just cancel call. But do you say to a parent, don't don't get Disney Plus, don't watch Disney movies, like, or do you just call Disney? I mean, what is it? Because how do we strike that balance between being active and protest?
Well, the more active you are, the more effective what you're doing. It's going to mean more. If you don't go to Disneyland or Disney World for a vacation, and it's because of their woke policies, call them and tell them that. If you just don't go, it'll have an effect, but it'll have a much more meaningful effect if you go there. Look, Disney's aware of this. I mean, you don't offend half your target market, and and not realize what you're doing. I mean, they're aware that they've messed this up. And they've lost control now in Florida of the land in which Disney World stands, thanks to Governor DeSantis. He deserves a round of applause. So they're aware that they've messed this up, but the more pressure you can put on them, the easier it makes the CEO to resist the internal culture. They've made so many changes that their culture has now changed. So when you're running that company, you want to make changes. You got to move. It's like moving the Titanic. It's not like turning a speedboat. You got to move. You got to turn the Titanic. And when you let them know that supports what they're doing, it makes it easier for them to do it.
And so, do you guys think that there's when you mentioned talking to the Speaker of Tennessee, is there a collaboration among the states to say, hey, I know I've talked to a lot on my show with Jimmy Patronis in Florida. I mean, they've done a great job in Florida of pulling out of BlackRock and saying, we're not going to let BlackRock invest our funds. Is there collaboration among the states and saying, hey, we've had a win, look at what you guys can do?
Absolutely. And when 25 states in this country make a move like that, we send a very clear message. And that changes a dynamic. But you cannot, I don't want to underscore the fact of the point that Andrew's making also. It's the people of our country also. Government can't do everything. They can't protect against everything. The people of this country have got to engage and act with your own money and make a protest vote by changing your business. Whether that's Disney, whether it's the financial institution that you use, the investment company that you use. If you want to get people's attention, you have once again, the man with the goal makes the rules. Well, and ultimately, that's the people of this country.
I think about the instance of Goya Foods, when the CEO of Goya Foods went to see President Trump, and he said something positive, and they tried to cancel him. In fact, everyone went out and bought garbanzo beans just to buy them, and said, screw you, we're going to support, Goya and President Trump, and they were benefited. So, I mean, that's another example of going out and voting with our pocketbooks and showing that we'll stand up for principles. But yes. I think that gets back to this idea of we've got the ability to vote with our wallets, too, just as much as the left. Yes. And if we stand up and do the right thing, that happens, right? I mean, that's the takeaway.
And that's what I believe the far left is ultimately concerned and scared of.
Right.
The people of this country activating and making those decisions with their pocketbooks.
Andy?
Yeah, the left doesn't want a second economy, and that second economy would be an economy that's supported by conservatives. And you do start to see the widening out there now, where some companies are going left, some companies are going right. The ideal world would be a Milton Friedmanish kind of world where everybody actually just focused on making profits, generating returns for investors, doing the kinds of things companies traditionally did. It's the change. It's that emphasis on this environmental, social, and governance investment criteria that's really had a terrible effect on our economy. I'll quote Joe Manchin. He said yesterday that ESG puts politics over the interests of 150 million retirees in this country. And Manchin isn't always right, but he was right yesterday.
Well, I want to thank you both for having this wonderful conversation. I think the big takeaway is, like, we've got power. Let's be active. Let's go out there and vote with our wallets. Let's have our voices heard, and let's get things done. Thank you for being a wonderful audience and being here.
Thanks, everybody.
Sean.
Welcome. Is everybody having a good time at CPAC? It's a great crowd and another great program. I'm really privileged to have Molly and Chairman Comer with me today. Let's get right to it. Mr. Chairman, first to you. I don't know that there's anybody in this crowd, but maybe there's somebody outside that's paying attention to this. Why in the world should we even be interested in this investigation? The Oversight Committee has begun on the Biden family, and what's the end game? What legislation or what fixes are you anticipating coming up with?
Everybody should be concerned because this is a threat to our national security. I mean, we all agree in Washington, even the Democrats, that China is our biggest threat. And what the average American is concerned about is China taking over the world. Every American was watching those balloons go over. They're angry that China's buying farmland. Well, what we're finding out is part of what the Biden family influence peddling involved was the Biden family were trying to work with China to get their foot in the door on the American energy industry, to try to help them not only buy liquefied natural gas, but also to buy ownership in the drillers. So this is an instance where our energy industry is a significant threat to our national security. And who was helping China navigate the federal bureaucracy? The Biden family. So we need to try to get to the bottom of this, and I think the American people deserve the truth, and at the end of the day, there will be a legislative fix. We're going to fix this to where there's a clear line as to what a family member can do with respect to a president of the United States as far as doing business overseas, and to increase the ethics and transparency laws to where this never happens again.
Molly, the chairman mentioned a threat to national security. How big a threat is it? And I mean, you've followed this story about as close as anybody I know, and for as long as anybody I know. How big a threat to national security? How deep in the Biden family does it go? We all know about Hunter. We know a little bit about Joe. What else is there to dig into?
Right. People are familiar with some of Hunter Biden's business dealings, but I don't know if they understand how much the entire Biden family has been involved in this pay-to-play operation for many, many years. So it's not just Hunter, it's also most prominently Joe's brother James, who's been involved in he's been investigated as well for some of the pay-to-play schemes that he's been involved with, or alleged pay-to-play schemes. But also other family members, nieces, and it goes beyond that. The reason why it's interesting is precisely for what Chairman Comer said. The way that the Biden family has made money is by collecting funds from foreign governments or oligarchs, compromised people, in exchange for favors to be named later. This of course affects the American people, and it happens to be that a lot of their business has been in China and in Ukraine and other places where we have every right to know exactly what was traded, exactly what was going on, and how it has affected American national security.
Mr. Chairman, so she's laid out that this is pretty extensive within the greater Biden family. Are you going to be issuing subpoenas on all those various members, the people, and can you compel them? Can you force them to testify?
We're going to do whatever it takes to get the truth, whatever it takes. We're starting with everyone that was involved in the Hunter Biden influence peddling scheme. I'm pleased to report we communicated with 4 of those people this week, either directly with the individual or with their attorneys. So we are making progress. We've just been chairman of the committee for 5 weeks, and we've already made contact, and I'm pleased to say are getting some cooperation from some of the people involved in the influence peddling.
Molly, let's stay on that theme for just a little bit. When everybody's going to laugh at this, I know they are. When Joe Biden was campaigning, he said that he never talked to Hunter Biden about any of this China business. We find that curious now, and especially a guy named Tony Bobulinski, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly, he kind of blew the whistle on that. But we haven't seen much of Bobulinski since then. Are we going to see him again? Should we see him again?
Well, if we could just revisit this, too. We had from the 2015 to the current moment an absolute paranoid conspiracy theory that the Trump family had engaged with Russia and had stolen the 2016 election. This was a widely held conspiracy theory. And if you recall, the Trump family actually was engaged in global business, like legitimate global business. It would not have been that crazy if they'd had involvement with Russian interests. Then you have the Biden family, which has no legitimate business interests in all these foreign countries. You have Joe Biden saying, not just that he never talked to Hunter about China, but that he never talked about his China business, but that he never talked about the Hunter Biden business at all. You had an eyewitness account, Tony Bobolinsky, saying, well, that's not true because I personally spoke with Joe Biden about this. But you have all sorts of other evidence as well. You have meetings between Hunter Biden affiliates in Ukraine with Joe Biden during the vice presidency. You also have interesting stuff coming out with the classified document scandal. So the classified documents, which in Joe Biden's case he's mishandled going back to his time as a senator, involve a lot of things that almost read like they would be bulletins of interest to someone who is trying to do a pay-for-play type operation. So all of these things are really important. I also want to say the reason why this investigation is so important is that the Department of Justice should have been investigating this. And they, in fact, had been investigating some of this. But because of our politicized Department of Justice, they shut down investigations. They did not help with these investigations that were looking into different aspects of the Biden family business. The current U.S. attorney looking into it is highly understaffed, and he's operating out of a very small office that doesn't have the resources necessary. And even though there's a conflict of interest, Merrick Garland has not named a special counsel, which is in complete violation of rules there. So what's being investigated is very important.
Quick follow-up to both of you. How far back in the president's career does this go? He's been in D.C. almost since Lincoln. A long, long time. So how far back does this go? Molly?
I just want to say that there are so many, we have an overclassification problem in this country, particularly, it's not so surprising that you've had Biden, Trump, and Pence all brought up with this classified document issue. It happens. The fact that some of these classified documents that Joe Biden is accused of mishandling date to the Senate has kind of shocked the town. Because whereas these type of information is kind of flowing all the time in the executive branch, you actually kind of have to work hard to mishandle documents when you're in Congress. And some of them do date to his time as a senator.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman?
Right now, today, we're going from today all the way back to Burisma. We're trying to focus on that. There's enough information there. I think the American people are going to get a good taste of what the Biden family business is about. And what Molly said is exactly right. The Democrats like to compare to what Trump did. Trump and Kushner, they have legitimate businesses. I know what their businesses are. They own real estate. They own golf courses. They own apartment complexes. They have employees. What's the Biden business? They don't own anything. They don't sell anything. They don't manufacture anything. What is the business?
Being the big guy.
The business is influence peddling. And there's a term for that. It's called being a foreign agent. So one of the things the Department of Justice could have already indicted, it looks to me like it's pretty clear that Hunter Biden and possibly the president's brother were essentially foreign agents, which they weren't registered, and there should be ethics laws that say immediate family members can't be foreign agents for foreign countries. So, they don't have a legitimate business, but they were getting paid excessive amounts of money from some of the worst countries on the world. If there's any bipartisan agreement on putting sanctions on certain countries, I guarantee you those countries are where the Biden family were profiting.
Stay on this topic for a little bit. If you can expand on what you've already requested in the way of documents and evidence, please tell us. And if I understand some of the news reports right, the U.S. Treasury, disappointingly, but maybe not surprisingly, is stonewalling you a little bit, given the Heisman on what's called suspicious activity reports.
Yeah.
What's that about, and can you break the logjam?
Well, I have a banking background, and suspicious activity reports, or SARs, are things hardly no American will ever get. And the Biden family has at least 150, and I believe more, from, it looks like, around 13 different banks. Since September the 11th, the chairman of the House Oversight Committee or the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee has had access to these suspicious activity reports. That would be under President Bush, under President Obama, and under President Trump. When Joe Biden became president, he snuck in right at the very beginning and did what's called a rule change, not an executive order, but a rule change. He changed rules to where the chairman of those committees couldn't have access to suspicious activity reports. Now, why would he do that? No, most members of Congress didn't know what a suspicious activity report was at the time, and no member of Congress knew that the Biden family had so many. So he's clearly trying to hide evidence of potential wrongdoing. I mean, his family has over 150 of these. I was a director of a bank.
150?
Over 150. When a suspicious activity report is the bank notifying the Treasury Department that we believe our client could have potentially committed a crime. Now, no bank wants to issue those because when you do, you are inviting the bank examiners into the bank. I was a director of a bank for a long time. The last thing you want are the bank examiners in the bank any more than they already are. You're not going to issue one of those on a good customer. You're certainly not going to issue one on the son of the President of the United States or the brother of the Vice President of the United States unless you're pretty certain potential wrongdoing occurred.
Yeah, I spent a number of years in banking too, so I know exactly what a SARS is, and you're right, 150 to one family. I've never heard anything even close to that.
Never. That's probably a record, and I'm being serious. I've talked to...
Not a good record to have either.
No, not a good record.
My goodness. It's incredible. I had no idea. Molly, there's been a lot of focus, of course, on the famous laptop, the laptop from hell. And I'm guessing that Chairman Comer, as well as the Judiciary Committee, are going to be digging into that. What are the substantive charges that might come out of that part of this whole scandal?
There's so many different interesting things about the possession of the laptop. First and foremost, I think the fact that when it was discovered, we had big tech and big media conspiring, colluding to suppress open discussion of this, interfering in a U.S. election. That is a major issue. But the laptop, obviously, for those who have suffered through seeing some of it, there's a lot there. And a lot of it is salacious and not probably relevant to your investigation. But a lot of it just deals with the actual business dealings that Hunter Biden was engaged in over the course of many years. And so it is important that the oversight is being done on this, also because while the FBI had possession of this, they were not apparently sharing it with some of the arms throughout the Justice Department that were doing investigations into the Biden family business. They seem to be protecting the laptop from being open to examination. And so the laptop gets a lot of news because of the salacious stuff. But what's really important, and what's important for the American people, is how are U.S. interests compromised by having powerful families in bed with China? We know so much about how the Biden family has made so much money through China. Is that the reason why we are not doing what we should be doing to take them on as the threat that they are? And it's not just the Biden family, by the way. It's other important families in D.C. that make so much money from the communist Chinese government that they're unwilling to do what we need to do in taking them on. Things that never would have happened when we were engaged in a Cold War with the Soviet Union, where it was all hands on deck. We are in a society right now where we have Hollywood and the media and our most powerful politicians in both parties actually working with China and making so much money off China that it's a national security problem. And I'd say first and foremost is the Biden family, which, they've been involved for a long time. They've made a ton of money this way, and it's reflected in how Biden has spoken very softly about China, how he seems to have not been aggressive in countering the threats that they pose, whether economic or military. And there's no question that voters have every right to know what's going on here.
I want to ask the same question to both of you, and this is a very personal question, but I bet it's one that everybody watching here has as well. With the closeness that we already know that the Biden family has had with China specifically, has China got the goods on them? Have they got their hand on the lever to exert that influence? I mean, isn't that what this is really all about?
That's what our investigation's all about. and make no mistake, this is an investigation of Joe Biden. And to determine whether or not Joe Biden, first of all, lied to the American people, I think we're going to be all right on that answer. But secondly, is Joe Biden compromised because of the millions of dollars that his family received, not just the money directly sent to an LLC, which served as a pass-through to Hunter and to Jim Biden, but also to the University of Delaware and the University of Pennsylvania.
Right.
I mean, Biden, the 4 years he wasn't in office, you know, he drew a salary from an entity that was, by all accounts, funded through China. So when you ask when President Biden met with President Xi several months ago, why didn't he bring up the origination of COVID-19? You know, why did they let the balloon fly over? Why are they continuing to let China manipulate our currency and get away with secret talks with Russia and trying to be the player on the world stage? You know, is it because he's compromised? And that's what the purpose of this investigation is. That's why it's of the utmost importance to our national security to determine whether or not this president's compromised.
Molly, you want a piece of that?
I'll just also say it's not just China. I mean, there was a previous Senate investigation into the Biden family business that did have access to some of these Treasury documents. They showed that the Bidens were receiving money from Ukrainian interests, Russian interests, oligarchs throughout the world. And it's not just that we're not doing what we need to do to take on China. It's also that the Biden family has been just intimately involved with Ukrainian interests. And unfortunately, Ukraine has a massive corruption problem. And so some of the focus there, it relates to China in the sense that how we are waging this war in Ukraine is drawing Russia and China closer together, but it's bigger and broader and on a much more global scale than just China.
Mr. Chairman, so far, I mean, you're into this thing pretty deeply, I can tell already. What's maybe the biggest piece or several pieces of information that maybe the general public isn't aware of that you've already uncovered?
I think, first of all, the thing that struck me is how much money the Bidens got from China. It's more than what's been previously reported. And the fact that it's pretty clear that Joe Biden was involved. And that's what the Democrats have said. When we won the House, we flipped the House, we went back to Washington for a lame duck session. Jim Jordan and I had a press conference because Jordan's on the oversight committee too. We had a press conference to announce we were going to formally start this investigation in January when I became chairman and had subpoena power. And the press said, oh, this is Russian disinformation. There's nothing in the laptop. You know, there's nothing to see here or whatever. Today, just a few months later, now the press is acknowledging, just like the Twitter executives did in our first hearing, that the laptop was real. They made a mistake suppressing it. Now Jordan's going to talk to those 51 intelligence commissioners and let them explain why they signed that letter saying the laptop was Russian disinformation. But the press is now saying, well, yeah, Hunter Biden, he probably did some bad things. But look, he had a drug problem, and Joe Biden wasn't involved. Now, the first part of their explanation is right. The second part, it looks like Joe Biden was very involved because Joe Biden claims he never met with any of these people. I mean, some of them flew on Air Force Two with Joe Biden when he was vice president.
There are pictures of him
There are
having
pictures,
dinner.
there are emails, and we've spoken. We have met with people that were in the room with Joe Biden when these business deals with his son were being involved.
Yeah, you can do that.
Yeah.
Molly, again, you've acknowledging that you've dug into this thing pretty deeply yourself, and thank you for doing it. What surprises might still await both the chairman, the committee, and the rest of us in this investigation as it unfolds?
I don't know exactly, but I think one thing that's interesting is there's such a broad nature of criminal allegations, and we seem to get an indication months ago through leaks to the media that there were going to begin to be some charges against Hunter Biden. I mean, he's done things that if you or I had done them, we would already be in prison, like on gun charges alone. But they didn't do it before the election, which kind of makes sense because you don't want to meddle. Well, it would make sense if there was any consistency in our Department of Justice on that. But if they were legitimate and if they weren't corrupt, and if they were consistent in how they did this. Not doing things before the election would be understandable. But now here we are months later, and we still haven't heard. So I think we might be interested in what it is they're going to do there. And I do think people would be surprised by the breadth of influence peddling that was going on, and just, you know, things that we maybe already know but haven't gotten enough attention. Like, I always think about that $80,000 diamond that was given from a Red China affiliated person to Hunter Biden, which we learned about because of like divorce paperwork. What are you expecting to get in response, you know, in return for that kind of gift? Right. And that's just like the kind of stuff that we happen to know about. There's so much more that we have yet to learn.
Right. You mentioned big tech a little bit ago, and I should have followed up probably right there, but let me ask now, both of you, big tech's role in at least trying to keep the blankets on the bed, keep this covered up for as long as they could. That's obviously going to be part of the investigation. Can we hold them accountable too?
It's such a massive problem, the role that big tech has in suppressing freedom of speech and freedom of debate, and truly election meddling. There is no question that every American had the right to know what the Biden family business was doing and what it was involved in. And it wasn't just that most members of the media did nothing to investigate it. It's when one brave newspaper, the New York Post, did get the goods on this and began reporting it. There was this concerted effort, a conspiracy, a collusion to shut this down, and many people should be held accountable. I don't actually know exactly what that means, but people need to stop giving propaganda press legitimacy. They are actively harming the country. They do not have the right to harm us in this way. And so I think that people who are victims of this should stop giving them any legitimacy whatsoever. Yeah. Something needs to be done about big tech. And frankly, the typical conservative response is insufficient. Typically, conservatives will say, there's nothing we can do about this destruction of the country because they're a private company. No, they're more like another country. They're more like another government. And they are so powerful, and they have such an outsized effect on our, on the freedom of our elections, on the security of our elections, on our ability to just be free people and debate the truth. Something must be done. And I sure hope your colleagues are going to wake up and realize that something really needs to be done there. And then another part of it is that we have all sorts of agencies who are involved in this conspiracy to suppress conservative debate and information. We've had some reporting recently about this Disinformation Inc. It's a global billionaire-funded operation to say that if you are the New York Times and you lie for years about the Russia collusion hoax, you're good media. And if you expose what the New York Times is doing, well, you can't be trusted. They give that information to advertisers and other people like like search engines, and it ends up being that the New York Times gets to grow and the conservative media is declining. We are in an information war, and it's being waged by government agencies. They are funding some of these things, and so that's another area that really needs to be taken on if we want to have even any hope of being a free people.
Mr. Chairman, do you want to add anything to this exposing that, I mean, at a minimum, it'd be nice if we knew the truth about big tech and the media's role in covering this up.
Well, that was part of the commitment to America, to hold big tech accountable. There are committees that are supposed to be doing that right now, energy and commerce primarily. They're looking at Section 230 and some of the other things that we've all talked about. I'll tell you what my committee's doing, the House Oversight Committee. We just passed, it was my bill, passed out of committee, the Protecting Speech from the Government Act. Basically, it prevents what the FBI was doing. Right now, the Hatch Act apparently didn't apply to social media activities. So we've expanded, this bill expands the Hatch Act that would prevent and allow us to hold FBI agents accountable. We didn't know until Elon Musk released the Twitter files that the FBI had a special unit of 50 people at least. They didn't have the authority to do it. They didn't have the funding to do it, but somehow they had 50 employees that did nothing but police social media. And they were policing social media against conservatives. They were censoring conservative speech. But we can't hold, though there's a loophole in the law, apparently, that allowed them to do this. The government has no business censoring speech, whether it be conservative speech or liberal speech. That's a First Amendment right. That's a violation of the First Amendment. The government shouldn't do that. This bill will make it not only illegal, but allow them to be prosecuted for that.
I want to be sure and ask you before you get away. We started CPAC yesterday morning with Chairman Schlapp and Chairman Jim Jordan from the Judiciary Committee talking about the investigation that he's undertaken. So, knowing the both of you a little bit, I know that you've separated the turf a little bit, and you've got your responsibilities. He has his in Judiciary. How have you divided that up? What should all of us expect from your respective investigations?
Well, Jim's the GOAT. Jim's the LeBron James of the House Republican Conference. And Jim gets more words per minute in than I do. I don't know if anybody's noticed that. But Jim's focused on the Department of Justice. He's focused on the weaponization of the Department of Justice, the weaponization of the FBI. He's also on the Oversight Committee, so he knows what we're doing with respect to the Biden investigation. Part of the problem with the Biden investigation is overreach by the Department of Justice. There are a lot of questions we have for the Department of Justice as to why has Hunter Biden been able to get away with this. No other American would have gone this long without being indicted. But for whatever reason, the Department of Justice hasn't done anything to Biden. So Jim's focused on that. He's also a key person on the Oversight Committee focused on the Biden family influence peddling. So we work together really well. We communicate every day.
Well, thank you for doing it. Let me ask both of you the same question as we wind this down. As I sit here, Mr. Chairman, you're in Congress. I was in Congress, privileged to be there for a little while. Molly, you've observed the buggers for a while, so you've got a perspective as well. I know what human nature is. I understand that we are a fallen nature. I get all of that. But I honestly struggle with how anyone, Joe Biden, whomever, could somehow think that this is all okay. That after that many years of, call me naive, call me whatever, I always thought we were supposed to be held to a little higher standard. Yep. Not that the rules didn't apply, but in fact, they were more onerous.
But you already said this, right? Like, this is a man who's been operating in Washington, D.C. for more than half a century, and he's gotten away with it the entire time. It's not just him, it's other people who are involved in some fraudulent activity. Money is very tempting, and but that's why it's important, why we have a system of government that has these checks and balances that is supposed to limit corruption, and so hopefully that's what will happen here.
Yeah, it's very obvious. Joe Biden's very arrogant. He's very entitled. He thinks that the law does not apply to him, and obviously he thinks that applies to his family as well. One thing I've noticed in 6 years in Congress, I've been in Congress 6 years, it seems like the members get worse, most of the members get worse the longer they stay. One of the greatest things that this Republican majority can do, and I hope we do it, I'm for it 100%, is pass term limits. We need term limits.
Right.
Well, I think we're in good hands with Chairman Comer and Chairman Jim Jordan leading this investigation. It's a shame we've got to have one.
That's the pandemic we have to worry about. It's in our schools, it's in our military, it's in our government at all levels, it's in our corporations, it's in our media culture, And it's this sort of casual racist approach to treating American citizens, that some citizens are to be vilified because of their race and treated as victims because of their race.
America is under attack. Our families are being crushed under the politics of a radical agenda. But moms have had enough. We are standing up and we are fighting back.
This is our battle. This battle is every bit as important as the Revolutionary War because we fight for the same thing.
Moms for America is a national movement.
Panel.
Get that out of the way.
And,
buy the books, listen to the podcast.
The deep state is something that, you know, like Jack was saying, not only did we wish we didn't have to do this. I wish we didn't have to address a deep state.
Yeah.
That's something that you're talking about in like tyrannical dictatorships. But in 2023 America, you have a two-tier system of justice that was created by the very people that were supposed to serve you and create an equal tier system of justice. I mean, Julie is the expert on how the January 6th defendants have been mistreated and how their due process rights have been violated. So The way that I think you crack the deep state is personnel. And it's not necessarily a fault of the last Trump administration, because what did they do? They were never in politics. They came in and said, okay, you guys have been in government 15, 20 years. We're supposed to be able to rely on you for being, whether it's Republican or Democrat, to do the national security mission, to do the America First mission, to put the interests of Americans first. And some of those people, a lot of them, unfortunately, we just got it wrong. So I think the bench, I want to highlight this. The bench exists. The people are there for every agency and department. And I got so motivated behind it that I wrote a book called Government Gangsters, which the deep state is actually trying to prevent the release of that manuscript. But we're going to take them to court. It'll hopefully be out this spring. And you got to educate everyone. I list every single government gangster by agency and department. But the one thing Donald Trump taught me was don't just highlight the problem. What's the solution? How do we fix the FBI, DOJ, and the swamp and every other agency? And it starts with personnel, and it ends with congressional oversight. And hopefully that's something that's ramping up.
And that means getting the right people in office who understand exactly what Cash is talking about. I want to see congressional candidates that have your book with notes and highlights and underlines and dog ears and everything. Some people think that's...
Not with the RNC we have now.
Oh, we'll talk about that. Julie Kelly, though. And by the way, congratulations to Julie Kelly because of your yeoman's work on the Jan 6 issue. Seriously, give it up for her. And I want people to understand that in the dark days, in Jan 7th, Jan 8th, Jan 9th, I'll tell you something. Everybody knows I'm on Twitter constantly. I didn't even tweet those days because I didn't know what was going on. I went 3 days without tweeting.
Now that is a national emergency.
That's a national emergency right there. We didn't know what was happening. The censorship hammer was coming down. People were getting arrested left and right. And there was one person that stood up and said, what's going on is wrong, and that was Julie Kelly. And just this week, Rasmussen just dropped a new poll that said 61%, not of Republicans, but of all voters believe that January 6th was likely provoked and instigated by federal agents. 61%. Julie, how did you do it?
Well, first of all, Jack has been a friend of mine since the very beginning, even before January 6th, and I would not have any sort of platform on Twitter to share my work without you. So I want to thank you so much for your friendship for years. Also, I would not be able to write about January 6th or cover it if it wasn't for Following Cash, Devin Nunes, and this small team of courageous warriors who took on not just the swamp in the Democratic Party, but 90% of the Republicans to uncover the biggest scandal in American history, which was Russiagate. And what they tried to do and are still trying, is to destroy them. But because I had a basis of covering that, it helped with my learning curve on what to cover for January 6th. And then, of course, the plot against the president, the documentary that Amanda, if you haven't watched it, please watch it, because, these are the people who saw this first and fought it first. But unfortunately, what started in 2016 with Crossfire Hurricane has only accelerated. And when the DOJ decided an FBI to go after Donald Trump, his closest campaign associates, people like Carter Page, and everyone was like, who cares about Carter Page? Who cares about Paul Manafort? Who cares about Trump or his family? It was literally, 5 years later, less than 5, that they took that weaponization and they aimed it at half of the country because no one paid a price. No one still has paid a price for Russiagate. And so they took their cues, they've accelerated the national security state, the intelligence apparatus, and more importantly, law enforcement against Americans. We now have nearly 1,000 people who've been charged related to their involvement in January 6th, criminal charges that are mostly low-level misdemeanors that nonetheless have destroyed their lives, ruined their families, bankrupted them, and alienated them from their own communities because they are considered domestic terrorists. That number will double, according to Matthew Graves, the DC U.S. attorney, who is handling all of the prosecutions. They want, now think about this, you're a former prosecutor, they want 2,000 total arrests. Since when do you put a number on an investigation? But they're so flagrant and brazen about it, and the real villains here are the judges on the D.C. District Court. None of this happens without the judicial imprimatur, and we're talking Trump-appointed lawyers, Obama, Clinton, down to Reagan, if you can believe it. They've acted as nothing more than a rubber stamp. This is a huge, massive travesty of justice. It's hard to unwind, but to Jack's point, the poll that came out this week, when you have 61% of Americans who believe that feds were involved, which of course we know that they were, but also 80% of Americans want the January 6th, the secret tapes, the unreleased, unseen videos released to the public. Little victories. We'll take little victories. So thank you all, and thanks, Jack, for the question.
Okay, so Amanda, now we were joking, I think, before we came on the panel today.
Were we?
We were talking. Was it a joke or was it serious? I don't know. We were guessing which one of us would say something that gets this panel canceled first.
And we bet, we have
bet
a
it was
bet.
Definitely Amanda.
Yeah.
Definitely Amanda.
No doubt.
So
I'm ready.
When it comes to this, so Amanda, you had a tweet recently.
Oh no.
Where you said, if I can, and I'll paraphrase.
I'm playing a character.
That when Donald J. Trump is reelected President of the United States in 2024, right? And that's the old Reagan line about recession, depression, recovery. That the first thing that the personnel should be made to do when they're appointed in the administration is walk into one of these federal bureaucracies and then just fire every single person in the room to their face.
Yes. Like I specifically said.
I have a list, by the way.
It has to be like a gang where you have to prove that you'll do it. So you can't get to choose what agency or what. You just have to walk into a room full of other human beings, all bureaucrats, and deliver them their pink slips, which will be done by Schedule F.
Yes.
Which
is with Schedule F.
I talk about Schedule F all the time. I'm like a total nerd, but it is the one way that our administration finally figured out how to fire entrenched bureaucrats. Because as both of you guys have said, personnel is the problem. That's why we have the corruption at DOJ. That's why we have the corruption in every single agency down to the FEC, like the SEC, everything down to the EPA. I mean, there is no such thing as a non-corrupt agency. I mean, what?
Wait, but Amanda, the EPA,
Energy came out with the reality on COVID. But yeah, so that's the idea. So okay, if there is the next Trump administration, what you have to do when you come in is you fire an entire room full of bureaucrats. And then if you can actually fire enough people that you close a bureau, everyone is awarded with a single tattoo on their face.
Like the guys down in El Salvador.
Yeah, like
MS-13.
So everyone, when you
you
see somebody coming with like several, you're like, oh my God. Like,
you're going to have to get a whole barrel full of ink when I walk in. Because I'm going to walk in. I'm going to walk in. I'm like, why do we have 16 intel agencies? This one's gone, this one's gone, this one's gone.
No, I mean, it's true. And all I got when I was in State Department for basically ridding us of the duplicative bureau that I was put in charge of as the head political, it's gone now. I'm like the only person that was willing to kill my own fiefdom. And for that, I got the threat of being fired every week.
Yes.
And my boss and I would go through the resumes. And I was like, they're going to try and fire me again. But yeah, I mean, we need to change that. Personnel is policy, and I think we all know now that personnel is the most important thing in an administration, and also a strong Congress. I'm going to get off this hobby horse in a second, but on the administrative state, none of this would be possible if Congress did its job.
Yes.
It's supposed to be the one that writes laws and legislates, but what we have is law by administration. And that's not an accident. The administrative state was built on purpose, which means it can be unbuilt on purpose. That's the thing that I want to tell conservatives, because they frequently act like it's this sort of mysterious growth of DC that just happened over the years.
I've always said that whenever and you guys will appreciate this, Cash, for sure, is that when you're you're walking around, and if you've ever done any work in the federal government, they have this phrase called the interagency. And whenever someone invokes the interagency, it's like, and I'm Catholic, you know, so it's like invoking the Pope. The interagency, oh yes, the interagency, yes. The interagency said, the interagency consensus, you know, on Russia, on Ukraine, on China, on the laptop, on Russia, on everything. The interagency, God bless the interagency, you know, order pro nobis.
What is it? But yeah.
You never know what it is, but it is the thing that is actually considered in charge.
Junior people, that's the other funny thing, is it's never actually like, you know, the Secretary of State or like the Secretary of Defense or like anything like that. It's usually just like these minions' careers being thrown into NSC, making these decisions. I mean, Cash would certainly know.
Well, people like Eric Charamella, people like Alexander Vindman, people like Alexander Vindman's brother, who, by the way, excuse me, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, who, by the way, I don't know if you guys, if you caught Human Events yesterday, we dropped a ton of receipts on Vindman. I got his entire pitch deck where Vindman and his brother have been
like others, you know, Matt, they're going to do that. Well, others didn't show. I was like, yeah, they're raising money from the people who don't necessarily believe in America first, but because they need their money. So who's got gold bars? There's one. Another. You're a lucky man, sir. Any more? They may do some more. Look at that, another one there. Well, I think you guys will have an awesome time. Yep. There's people gaming the system. What are you, Democrats? You're trying to get under other seats? They're ballot harvesting, Matt. By the way, my political speech for the day, if we don't start doing the same thing that Democrats do, none of it matters. All right? Remember that. Like, we have to be ballot harvesting. For the first time, perhaps ever, we're actually winning on the issues, but we can't implement all of the things that we want, like the logical things like same-day voting, paper ballots, ID checks. Like, even the socialists in Europe are like, you seriously don't have those things? Like, they're left of some of the lunatics on the left here, and they're shocked that we don't. But guess what? While we want all those things as Republicans, we'll never get them if we don't actually play the game, right? The left has weaponized COVID. They weaponized the pandemic to change the playing field. And guess what? We can't implement the things that we want if we're not in control. So in the meantime, until we take over those institutions, usually in the state legislatures, it won't matter. So we have to play the game on the battlefield that they've laid out. We have to start playing the game aggressively like they always do. And if we don't do that, it won't matter. You could have whoever, the greatest candidate in the world, the greatest policies in the world, and a guy like John Fetterman would be able to beat them. You know, hey, guys, I'm the one that's willing to say this stuff because someone has to, because it's insane what's actually going on, right? And when I said, like, I don't know, it's sort of weird that Pennsylvania managed to elect a vegetable, they criticized me as being ableist. I didn't know what that was, but there's always an ist, right? There's always an ist, and it doesn't matter what you're talking about. And apparently an ableist is someone who discriminates against those with disabilities. I said, well, I'm not discriminating against an ableist. I'd love for John Fetterman to have, like, good gainful employment. Maybe he could be, like, a bag guy at, like, a grocery store. But, like, is it unreasonable for me to expect, as a citizen of the United States of America, to have a United States senator have basic cognitive function? Like, well, you make a solid point, sir. Why should a United States senator be held to a different standard than the President of the United States himself? So we have to fix all of that, right? But again, we can't fix it until we play the game their way. The other way we have to start doing that, folks, is we have to start voting with our wallets, okay? The number one thing that we can do to make sure that our values exist into the future is fueling the patriot economy. Just this week, I mean, this wasn't even going to be my speech until yesterday. I started a news app with my friend Taylor Butterwich because I got sick of, you know, perhaps me because I'm so immersed in this stuff, you know, I knew about the Hunter Biden story, but no one else did. It was in the New York Post, which is like the second oldest newspaper in America, but big tech made sure no one else ever saw that article. We now know that like 17% of Democrats wouldn't have voted for Joe Biden had they heard of this. So under the auspices of build your own, right? We've been always told, build your own. Now we try to build our own, and then Amazon Web Services throws you off. Or Apple won't let you on the App Store. Or Google does the same. You know, they say build your own, but they don't really mean it, right? They're not like, oh, you just do it your own. Like, we're going to put up every roadblock possible to make that happen. But we took the advice and we built our own. We created an app that simply aggregates news, MXM News, like minute by minute. We take articles from the left, articles from the right. I mean, I looked yesterday. We had stuff from like Mediaite on there, like not exactly what we'd call conservative material. And Taylor, while operating the business, goes to check our account balance and finds out that we have $0 in our operating account. There was about $750,000 in there the day before. Calls the bank, he calls me, he's like, hey, we have a problem. I'm, yeah, that's a problem. Like, that's not good. Calls the bank, finds out, oh yeah, you'll get a cashier's check in a day or two. What? Like, what do you mean? Yeah, we closed out your account. I was like, wait, PNC Bank. Okay, yeah. Like, this isn't like, and by the way, it's not like we're creating news. You know, like if I was talking about the Wuhan lab leak story as the most obvious thing in the world for the last 2 years, which I've been doing, like, I'm not even creating that. But because I'll show you the New York Times alongside a Breitbart and let you make up your own mind, that still to them is apparently an offense. Think about that. PNC Bank, a major national bank, but we've seen it all, right? I had Chase cancel something to do credit card processing, I think it was, for something I was speaking, because I was speaking at an evangelical event. Now, we understand based on the testimony of Chris Wray the other day that apparently, like, practicing Catholics are domestic terrorists. Just like concerned mothers not wanting their children to be indoctrinated with critical race theory, not wanting their children to be pressured into permanent, life-altering sex change surgeries by their rainbow-haired teacher without parental involvement or consent. You know, those aren't people to worry about, but practicing Catholics, concerned mothers, those are the real threats, you know? Remember the guys that always commit the crimes? Like, yeah, they were on our radar. Yeah, they were on your radar, but you were too busy monitoring someone's grandmother who was within 500 miles of January 6th in D.C. You know, not doing their actual job, but this is the FBI. You'd think, no way, they're above reproach, but the FBI is doing it. We've seen the DOJ. We've seen the treatment of the January 6th prisoners. We're now watching our banks do this to us. Guys, we got to fight back. I've said it on this probably stage last year. It's like, they could take out the most powerful man in the world, the President of the United States, like they did to my father. Because if you have one guy going out there by himself, all the slings, all the arrows can be put on that person. They cannot do it to us if there's 175 million Americans willing to stand up for themselves, for decency, for our values. I mean, think about what we're up against. A major U.S. bank was able to cancel, and just canceled, our ability to do banking. We didn't even get a call. It was like getting broken up with by text. Like, you know, no reason. It didn't matter what, you know, hey, you're letting people, it wasn't, again, we're not even creating news. We're aggregating it. Check out MXM. You'll actually see both sides of story, and you can formulate your opinion. And I'm so confident that we're right on our side that I'm willing to actually let you see the leftist viewpoint, because you will realize that they are insane. Why aren't they willing to show our side? Because they too realize that they're insane. Right? So what we have to do is we have to be involved in this. It's sort of amazing. I think Michael Seifert's here somewhere from Public Square. Another one. Great guys. You know, San Diego-based company. He was sitting there at home. He was sick of going to a coffee shop that was taking his hard-earned dollars and giving it to leftist radical causes that would throw any one of us in the gulags, with or without cost, right? Just, they would do it just because of what we believe. So he created a list of the conservative companies that shared his values, turned it into a website, and now Public Square has gone national. They're actually going public. But we have an obligation, if we want to exist, to support those kind of businesses. You're going to search it anyway, right? You're going to go on Google and find out what's the restaurant. I did it last night. Okay? I had a table of 20. I called at 8 o'clock, say, hey, we need a reservation. We got on Public Square. We found a restaurant that signed up because I know I could go there and not get booed, even in D.C. I won't mention the restaurant because they'll probably get canceled if I do, but it was sort of nice for me. We walk in, we're with Carrie Lake, and we're with Matt Gaetz and Nigel Farage. Like, it was a pretty conservative crew. That would have had a hard time probably eating in D.C. without getting yelled at. Now, I do well with that, but it's fine. But sometimes you want to just avoid it. And so we were able to find that. We have an obligation to get out there and support those kind of businesses. Because again, once we show the other side that there is pain in their wallets, I have to say that because someone will aggregate that and say that I was advocating for violence. No, but they can cancel us at any second. I mean, imagine being a guy at a bank being like, you know what, I'm just going to cancel Don Jr.'s news app. What could happen? And I have a platform of like 10 million people on Twitter, millions on Truth, millions on Facebook and Instagram. Like, I have the ability to fight back. And I did, and I put it out there, I put a tweet, and we had some pretty powerful people jump in on this, like the Speaker of the House. I would not have wanted to be PNC's bank's comms guy last night. That was probably a long evening. But again, they probably knew at least some of that was capable, and they still don't care. Right? This morning, right as I was getting on stage, it was a mistake. Upon further review, bullshit! Okay? It wasn't a mistake. Okay? Have you ever noticed the mistakes only go one way? You know? So go check out Public Square. Check out MXM. Support those businesses that support your values. Put their kids through soccer camp and soccer practice rather than funding, 10-month abortions. Some of the insanity that we see on the other side. Again, you have a choice. Exercise it. The other side is, they're willing to do it. They don't even care anymore. Look at this. Another perfect example. Glenn Story right here from Patriot Mobile. I promise you, folks, raise your hand if you don't have a phone. Well, I got to keep my phone away because I know, I'm on every FBI list imaginable, so I just got to keep it away because, they're going to drone me one day. You all have a phone. You all are going to use it. Well, you can give your money to AT&T, who has, in the last month, tried canceling Newsmax, who the month prior to that took off OAN out of millions of homes. The parent company is actively attacking conservative mindset. Again, nothing extreme. It's Newsmax and OAN. It's just the stuff that we all believe. That's extreme. We can't let them even have an opinion. We can't let them have a voice. So if you're going to have a phone, you can give your money to AT&T and watch it get weaponized against everything that you believe, or you can go to Patriot Mobile. It's that simple. But we have to start thinking this way, folks, because if we don't, it's over. It's not just about the political landscape. We discussed ballot harvesting again. That's number one, right? There's a reason you can win House seats because that's so localized, but you can't win the national because you can't go to California. There are people in Pennsylvania, I guarantee you, that have no idea who was even running for the United States Senate that voted. No, it's true. Of course. Because you could not listen. If you listen for 5 seconds to anything John Fetterman, you said, okay, he's clearly unfit for office. That's not, you don't have to be a doctor to be like, maybe there's something wrong. The Democrats knew he had these issues, and they ran him anyway. By the way, they had someone who I probably don't agree with on anything, but was at least able to function, maybe not quite as radical, Connor Lamb. They could have ran him, but they knew even in the primary that this guy had these issues, and they ran him anyway because they want a radical extremist that wants to release murderers. And this is the party of the left today. Right? There are still incredible, great, moderate Democrats in America, but they have no one representing them. Because you can't win if you don't espouse the lunacy of the left today. You can't get the California, New York, Soros money, whatever it may be, and win. You see the prosecutor just this week who misgendered a biological male in San Francisco, I guess it was, and Soros-funded George Gascon, punished this prosecutor for misgendering a child rapist. The child rapist doesn't really need the punishment. The prosecutor who misgendered him is the one that needs to be taught a lesson. That is America under Joe Biden. That is America under Democrats. That is an America that none of us recognize, and it's an America that's going to stay that way if we don't fight back and say enough is enough.